Chapter 8:18. Even a clay bodhisattva would have some temper. Xianxia had been humiliated time and time again in front of the woman he liked. The scholar cooked and swept the floor in a refined manner. He flicked the sword with his finger and sneered, "It doesn't matter if you've heard of Xianxia or not. The sword at his waist is called exquisite, and it comes from the Dongyue sword pool." For the first time, the man stopped being cynical and laughed softly. "I've heard of Li Chuangong's wooden bull, Huang Lu of Huangjintu, Su of Gojozian of the Wu family sword tomb, and Lu Baijia's Xiao. Exquisite? I've seen and touched a lot of women with exquisite figures." Xianxia was so angry that he laughed. He didn't want to argue with him and directly used exquisite to teach this arrogant guy a lesson. At this moment, the woman in fox fur who was called Mr. Yu by the scholar sighed and said, "Stop fooling around." When Xianxia was confused, Yu Yuwei, who had always been indifferent to him, said softly, "Master Qi, I advise you not to use your sword. Otherwise, you'll embarrass yourself." This time, it was the condescending Xianxia's turn to be on guard. With his family background, observing people was just a beginner's skill. He had already practiced it to the point of perfection. Although Mr. Yu knew that Xianxia's swordsmanship was undoubtedly the best among the younger generation of Xiangyin Academy, she still used the words, "embarrass yourself." It was like a hammer hitting a bell, making Xianxia dizzy. Most of his competitive spirit dissipated. The most important thing now was to find a way out of the pavilion. A way out of the world was 100 times harder to find than a real pavilion. Fortunately, the white-haired young man smiled and said, "You and your sword are not good, but you have good taste. However, I advise you to stay away from Yu Yuwei in the future. I won't argue with the Qi family." After saying this person brushed past them. With 2 fingers, he picked up the Wu Mainyang that was even more famous than the Linglong sword in Xiangyin Academy, and mischievously threw it out of the pavilion. The white cat rolled on the white snow. This scene stunned everyone who saw it. However, Yu Yuwei, who was extremely fond of her beloved white cat, only glared resentfully and did not reprimand him. Xianxia had no choice but to find a way out for himself. He said indifferently, "Since young master doesn't even care about the Qi family, then I'll wait and see." The goat-horned girl stared blankly at this unruly lecher. Then, she sat down beside Sister Fish and smiled at her. "This heroine with fierce fists and peerless legs. Please allow me to speak with your sister. Is that all right?" The little girl tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then, she left Yu Yuwei's warm embrace and waved her small hand vigorously. Like a general commanding his troops, she skipped away from the pavilion. Permission granted. After leaving the pavilion, a bunch of small heads huddled together and whispered. Even the child who was kicked by the little heroine did not hold a grudge. He ran over and squatted together. Seeing that she was angry, he pretended to be stupid and laughed. The goat-horned girl snorted coldly with a fierce look. She turned her head and the corner of her mouth curled up into a slight smile. A little girl who saw Xianxia as someone who would marry no one else but him when she grew up timidly spoke up for him. "Who is that guy? How can he be so rude? Young Master Qi must be unwilling to lower himself to his level. Otherwise, with young Master Qi's swordsmanship, he would have fallen into the Buddha's palm lake in one strike." The goat-horned girl rolled her eyes and lectured her. "Didn't you hear Sister Fish say that Xianxia was asking for humiliation? You little love-struck fool. I told you that Xianxia was an embroidered pillow. Why do you like him? His poems are just playthings promoted by his scoundrel friends. Even Master Su by the Lotus Lake commented that they were worthless." The little girl was angry, but she did not dare to refute. The goat-horned girl, who seemed to be very experienced in the ways of the world, clicked her tongue and said, "Although that white-haired man has a great enmity with me and will be beaten up by me sooner or later, I'm still very convinced right now. He said that he wouldn't be calculative with the Qi family, but not with Xianxia. Listen, how manly." A silly little chubby boy was puzzled. "Aren't they all the same? Your father is too knowledgeable. How did he give birth to such a greedy goose like you who only knows how to steal food all day long?" The old and experienced goat-horned girl punched him. The little chubby boy sat down in the snow. His eyes were moist. He wanted to cry but did not dare to. After a long while, the little chubby boy said in a sobbing voice, "I also wrote a poem this year." In the ancient Xiangyin Academy, if these children of great scholars and writers could not write a few poems before the age of 10, they would be laughed at. The goat-horned girl curled her lips and said, You don't know shit. How can that be called a poem? The little chubby boy wiped his tears and ran home to complain to his parents. The goat-horned girl sneered. Look, he's the same as that Xianxia. He can't win in a quarrel or a fight, so he likes to ask his elders for help. The other children looked at each other, speechless. In the pavilion, Yu Wei looked at him and did not say anything. They met again after parting at the Spring God Lake. Su Fengnian took out a piece of paper from his sleeve. His first sentence was extremely unpleasant. He handed it to Master Yu, who was a teacher at the Xiangyin Academy. There's an old scholar called Lu Wenbao in the Xiangyin Academy. He gave me some names. See if there are any familiar names. I don't really trust Lu Wenbao's comments. If there are any, tell me. If they are close to the truth, then I'll use peaceful means before resorting to force. Regardless of whether they are a 1,000-mile horse or a 100-mile donkey, I'll send them to Beiyang first. However, since Lu Wenbao has appointed them as generals, I reckon that they are all people with some knowledge. They would be happy to go to Beiyang and get an official position. As for the Grand Chancellor, go and tell him. If he can't bring himself to do it, it's okay. I'll go look for him myself later. Yu Wei asked calmly. Are you done? Su Fengnian nodded. She turned her head and said coldly, Then His Royal Highness can leave. Su Fengnian was silent for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. He said, Okay, and walked out of the pavilion gently. The snow on his shoulders was white, but his hair was white. Chapter 8:19. There was a forest of merits and virtues in Xiangyin Academy. Only Mr. Ji Shang could enter. Su Fengnian had studied the geography of the academy and was familiar with it. He thought that he would be stopped along the way, but when he entered the forest of monuments, it was lonely and only snow remained. His footsteps left a series of small pits in the snow, which were then covered by continuous snowflakes. Previously, he went to the small building by Lotus Lake where second sister stayed to study. He sat for a while and no one came to criticize him. Su Fengnian walked into the forest of monuments that recorded the merits of the ancestors. The monuments were of different sizes and most of the inscriptions were epitaphs. However, the graves were often not behind the monuments. The forest of monuments was like a different kind of history, quietly erected page by page in the back mountain of Xiangyin Academy. Su Fengnian squatted down in front of an exceptionally small stone tablet and used his sleeve to wipe away the accumulated snow. The epitaph on the tablet had the charm of the great Qin dynasty. Su Fengnian looked up at the falling snow and picked a relatively majestic stone tablet to lean against. After an unknown amount of time, he opened his eyes and saw a petite figure in a straw raincoat staggering over. She held a bamboo basket covered in cotton in her arms and walked with great difficulty. When she passed by Su Fengnian, she was about to squat down when she seemed to have seen a pair of black eyes hanging in the air. She was so frightened that she fell on her butt. Su Fengnian stood up and shook off the accumulated snow on his body. With an apologetic expression, he reached out to pull the goat-horned girl up. He thought that the girl would walk straight over, but he didn't expect her to stop in front of the stone tablet, causing her to suffer a false alarm. The goat-horned girl patted her chest and glared at the mysterious white-haired enemy. After Su Fengnian asked, he found out that the girl's surname was Ouyang, and her ancestral home was Takaraka. The inscription on the tablet behind her was an elegy written by her father. Every time Su Weisheng read it, he would cry. Su Fengnian originally thought that the words were extraordinary, but after reading it, he realized that it was like a letter from home. It was trivial and trivial. Su Fengnian stood up and shook off the snow on his body. With an apologetic expression, he reached out to pull the goat-horned girl up. He thought that the girl would walk straight over, but he didn't expect her to stop in front of the stone tablet, causing her to suffer a false alarm. The goat-horned girl patted her chest and glared at her white-haired enemy who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. After Su Fengnian asked, he found out that the girl's surname was Ouyang, and her ancestral home was Takaraka. The inscription on the tablet behind her was an elegy written by her father. Every time Su Weisheng read it, he would cry. Su Fengnian thought that the words were extraordinary, but after reading it, he realized that it was like a letter from home. Now that he was 20 years old, he encountered an unforeseen event. Now that he was helping the little girl wipe away the snow, he turned back to read the elegy. He actually pursed his lips, not daring to let the little girl see his face. She was still in her innocent years. When her ancestors passed away, she was not yet born, so naturally she did not feel too much pain. Growing up in the school, she was carefree. After she put down the basket, she started to mutter to herself. Su Fengnian then realized that today was her grandfather's death anniversary. This place was indeed a tomb. However, her parents had left for a long journey and had asked her to visit the tomb today. Unfortunately, an unexpected snowfall caused the little girl to suffer greatly. Along the way, she had cursed God countless times. It was not easy for the little girl to find someone who could talk. She spoke softly to the tombstone. Mr. Su, whom I admire the most, once said that my father's elegy was written from the bottom of his heart. Not a single word was deliberately added to the tomb. It was the best elegy. I don't really understand these things. I only feel that my father's elegy was simple and tranquil, just like when he was teaching. He could not speak of great principles. After so many years in the school, he did not teach many good students. If it were not for Master Su's good words for him, the family would not have been able to eat for a few years. The box that my mother used to store her dowry was getting emptier. When I was young, I could still secretly wear a lot of jade hairpins in my hair when my parents were not around. Now I can't. Su Fengnian laughed softly. You are still a child now. The goat-horned girl with the surname Oing rolled her eyes. Sometimes you have a poisonous mouth, as if you have eaten a green snake, centipede, or scorpion. You can make our first young master of the Qi family so angry, but you are also not good with words. How can you talk to a girl like that? I think you must have not gained anything from Sister Yu, right? The squatting Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and crossed them in front of his chest. He smiled and said, I ate a green snake, centipede, and you ate a crow? The little girl was smart. She raised her fist and pretended to be fierce. You are the one who has a crow's mouth. Su Fengnian smiled and squinted his eyes. At this moment, his eyes seemed to be narrow and intelligent. His handsome face was filled with warmth. It was hard to imagine that this was the #1 playboy in Bailiang who was feminine and full of ruthlessness. The best way to train one's eyesight was to train one's Taoism skills. When other people were racking their brains to jump into the vat of officialdom, Su Fengnian had already seen all kinds of strange and variegated shows in the vat. Although the goat-horned girl beside him acted like a heroine, like the king of children, her clothes were thin. At this moment, the overly loose straw raincoat she was wearing was even more tattered. Her family background was obviously not as good as her peers by the Buddha's Palm Lake. In another 5 or 6 years, the children would know the power of the soft knives in the world. Perhaps they would be bullied by their childhood playmates instead. Although the Xianxia Academy had been a holy land for learning since ancient times, there were bound to be disputes when there were hundreds of schools of thought contending. For example, during the chaos of the spring and autumn period, the military school was at its peak. Even those who were just there to make up the numbers were snatched away by the spring and autumn period countries as heroes who could turn the tide. However, at that time there was a wave of blind looting, and the countries really did pick up the scraps a few times. Now that the world was settled, the scene of scholars saving the country was no longer as grand as it used to be. Most of the scholars of Jishang and Jixia were dormant. It was inevitable that they would be entangled in daily necessities and seek personal gain. Lu Wenbao had recommended more than 10 people, but they were weak. Most of them were like this. They were depressed and did not achieve their goals. The goat-horned girl lifted the basket and asked, Are you coming with me? Su Fengnian shook his head. I'm about to leave the academy. She frowned her delicate eyebrows that already had a pair of embryonic willow leaves. She lowered her head and looked at the bamboo basket. Poor children had to take care of the household early. The food in the basket should not be wasted. However, she had a small appetite. Although it was not easy to get sick in winter, after all, the food was warm and would spoil the taste. Of course, the main reason was that she felt that it was really boring to walk back 1 or 2 miles by herself. It was better to have someone to talk to on the way back than to be alone in the cold. Su Fengnian smiled. If you don't mind me freeloading, I'll go with you. The goat-horned girl gracefully snapped her fingers and said the same witty catchphrase. Approved. Chapter 8:20. Returning home in the wind and snow, the goat-horned girl was wearing a pair of fine brocade boots. However, as she had not changed them for many years, the satin fabric was so worn that it could not withstand the wind and rain. Walking from her home to the Dowd forest, she was nearly soaked in them. The young lady was vexed that she had been in a hurry to cook and had forgotten to change her shoes when she left the house. She was both distressed and remorseful. However, Thinking that the new year was approaching and that her mother had promised to buy her a new pair of shoes in the first month of the lunar year, she was somewhat expectant. Su Fengnian took the bamboo basket and had her walk behind him. Having unexpectedly found a living person in the forest of steels, the little girl was in high spirits. She didn't have the taboo of speaking too much with a shallow acquaintance. Apart from introducing herself, she also talked about some old stories. She said that her grandfather was a great literary hero of the old northern Han, who was untainted by the wind and had written splendid essays. However, on the eve of the country's destruction, he spoke a few words of fairness to a great general surnamed Su in the imperial court. As a result, he was removed from his position and almost had his head chopped off. When he arrived at the education palace, he lectured on the righteousness and benefit of the state and was also ostracized. The young lady was not afraid of exposing her shortcomings. Su Fengnian followed her to the small courtyard that she shared with several scholars of the Shang dynasty. Most of the other chancellors of the academy also had a festive atmosphere in their windows. Only her house had a rack of grapes in front of it. After entering winter, there was no greenery, only vines, making it appear even more dismal. The young lady, on the other hand, was content and cheerful. Perhaps she had taken after her parents' temperament. As she walked past the rack of grapes, she raised her head and said with a smile, "You came at the wrong time. Summer is the best. Pick 2 or 3 bunches and place them in the Buddha's palm lake for 2 hours. They are so delicious that even the immortal peaches in heaven cannot compare to them. It's just that they attract mosquitoes at night." The goat-horned girl changed into a pair of boots and set up a stove. Placing the soaked boots beside the stove, she then went to uncover the pot to warm the food, allowing Su Fengnian to do as he pleased. He picked up a small stool and sat by the door. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the corner of the young lady's boudoir. It was a small table and cabinet, simple and clean. The sky gradually darkened, but the reflection of the snow made it brighter than usual. The doors of the other houses in the courtyard were tightly shut to block out the wind and snow. Just as Su Fengnian was sizing her up, the door across from him opened with a squeak. The young child who had been thrown to the ground by the goat-horned girl earlier ran out. His lips were red and his teeth white. When he grew up, he would most likely be an elegant and charming scholar. But when the child saw the stranger who had angered Master Qi in the pavilion, he was a little timid. He stood at the door, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. A middle-aged man who was reading softly with an ancient scroll in his hand somehow came to the door. He followed his son's line of sight and saw Su Fengnian sitting on the stool. He thought for a moment, held the book with one hand behind his back, and stepped over the threshold. He approached the door of the Ouyang family and smiled. "Little wooden fish, do you have a guest?" The elegant man spoke politely and nodded at Su Fengnian with a smile. Su Fengnian also stood up and greeted politely, "Greetings to Mr. Shang." This way of saying things was normal, but the advantage was that there would be no mistakes. Everyone in the court laughed that those who swept the floor and did odd jobs in the academy could be respectfully addressed as Mr. Outside. The goat-horned girl nicknamed Little Wooden Fish poked her head out of the kitchen and smiled. "Hello, Uncle Qin." After exchanging some pleasantries, Mr. Qin turned around and left. When he closed the door, the sound was slightly louder. Only then did the goat-horned girl snort. This fellow can be considered as Qi Shen's personal helper. Every now and then, he would exchange poems. He has some knowledge, but he doesn't have any strength of character. These years, he has earned quite a bit of money. Every now and then, he would come to my house and say that he wants to move away. He says that it's better to be close to a neighbor, but every time he talks, he would say that he lives in a private residence not far from Grand Chancellor Wang. He's just showing off his family's wealth to my parents. Su Fengnian took the bowl of rice and chewed slowly. He raised his head and smiled at his little daughter who was eating while standing. "You have to see others doing well." The little girl rolled her eyes. "You're the only one with a lot of principles." Su Fengnian suddenly changed the topic and said with a naughty smile, "But when it comes to poems, other than giving them to friends, the people who do most of it are scholars and famous prostitutes in brothels. I don't know who is the prostitute between you, Uncle Qin, and first young master of Qi." The goat-horned girl blushed when she heard that, but her eyes were filled with heartfelt joy. She smiled and said, "You're so mean." After eating, the little girl patted her round tummy and burped in an unladylike manner. Su Fengnian took the bowl and chopsticks and was about to go to the kitchen when the goat-horned girl had a shocked expression as though she had seen an immortal or a ghost. Su Fengnian, who was holding the bowl and chopsticks with both hands, said with a smile, "Only a gentleman stays away from the kitchen. Do you think I look like one?" The little girl said with a pained expression, "Sister, you has really met the wrong person to meet you." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Yes." After slowly washing the bowl and chopsticks, Su Fengnian used his sleeve as a rag to dry his hands. The little girl sat by the stove and held her cheeks in a daze. Su Fengnian was still sitting on the small stool. The little girl glanced at the dense snow outside the door and sighed helplessly. "If it wasn't snowing, I would be able to count the stars at night. I can count to more than 1,000. Isn't that amazing?" Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. "Amazing." The goat-horned girl curled her lips and said, "You're not sincere." Su Fengnian followed her and looked outside the door in silence. After a long time he said softly, "When I was young, I heard the adults say that the starry sky at night is a big lantern full of fireflies." The little girl laughed and said, "When I see fireflies in summer, I kill them one by one." Su Fengnian glanced at the goat-horned girl who was laughing evilly. "Whoever marries you in the future will be unlucky." The little girl held her cheeks and said sadly, "That's right." At dusk, a thin old man slowly walked into the courtyard. He was wearing a green robe and hemp shoes, and there was a suet jade pendant hanging from his waist. There were thousands of people in the school. The goat-horned girl believed that she had a photographic memory, but she still didn't recognize this old man. Su Fengnian, however, knew him. He was a terrible chess player who thought that he was the top national chess player. Back then, at the top of Mount Qingliang, he was evenly matched with Su Xiao. He was good at reversing his moves, and Su Fengnian had a headache watching the game. However, this old man was his second sister's master, and he deserved to be called the #1 person in the world who was good at chess. Under the side eye of the goat-horned girl, the old man casually sat down and asked shamelessly, "Little girl, do you still have food?" Although the little girl was shrewish, her upbringing was very good and strict. She stood up and smiled. "Sir, my family has food." Su Fengnian reached out and secretly took the jade pendant from the waist of the old man who had almost become the Grand Chancellor of the Xianxia Academy. He handed it to the little girl and said, "These are worthless scraps of white jade. Just take it as the payment for our meal." The old man's expression was normal. He nodded with a smile and didn't give the little girl a chance to refuse. "If you don't accept it, I won't eat it." The little girl shook her head hard and said seriously, "Can we not be so tacky?" Su Fengnian and Chancellor Wang looked at each other and smiled. Su Fengnian didn't return the jade pendant to the Chancellor. The latter waited for the little girl to go to the kitchen to cook and asked calmly, "I have 600 people. Do you dare to eat Beiliang?" Su Fengnian thought for a while. "There are only people who starve to death. I've never heard of people who eat to death." The old man shook his head and said in a low voice, "Not necessarily." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It's hard to say if half of these people can reach Beiliang in the end. They won't eat to death in Beiliang." The old man nodded and said, "That's true." Chapter 821. The goat-horned girl was very considerate and didn't care that the two guests had stolen the limelight. Seeing that they looked like they were going to talk in the middle of the night, she lit up 2 thick red candles in the hall and went to her boudoir to flip through her books. The door was half closed and there was a small gap. She was willing to light up the lamp, so she secretly squatted by the door and read with the help of the faint light. The number of chancellors and teachers in Xianxia Academy were as many as the hairs on a cow, but there were only a few who could be evaluated as a master. Back then, Chancellor Wang won the debate between name and reality, lost the battle between heaven and man, and lost to the current Grand Chancellor of the Academy. In terms of weight, he was still ranked in the top 3 in the Academy. In terms of the talent of eloquence, no one could beat him. At this moment, Chancellor Wang bent over and stretched out his hand to warm himself by the fire on the stove. The light shone on his weathered face and he occasionally picked up a peanut from the bowl and threw it into his mouth. Su Fengnian sat on a small stool and carried the girl's favorite pair of brocade boots. He controlled the fire and roasted them slowly at a height away from the burning charcoal in the stove. In this way, no matter how prestigious their identities were, both of them had a rustic vibe and didn't look like clay bodhisattvas who were worshipped high above. The two of them didn't speak hastily even though the situation was urgent and could be said to be urgent. After all, the affairs of the world couldn't be discussed with one's hands and couldn't be regretted. Chancellor Wang was serious this time and his mood wasn't relaxed. Scholars only talked on paper and often had high standards but little ability. Chancellor Wang spent his whole life studying the art of maneuvering, but no matter how good the plan was, it still had to be done by people. Once a piece was placed on the chessboard, it couldn't be changed again. However, how could a living person be so simple? Who would be willing to be a puppet or a pawn to cross the river? This was also the root of Chancellor Wang's carelessness in playing chess. The chessboard and chess pieces were all dead objects. Otherwise, if he were to choose a talented person to govern the country, he could just casually pick a few famous national players. When the little girl who was hiding behind the door to read her book was flipping through the pages, she glanced at the white-haired man outside the door. She definitely couldn't hate him, but if she were to say that she liked him at the first awakening of love, she wouldn't. Firstly, she was still young, and secondly, in the matters between men and women, it wasn't as if the other person was good enough for her to like him. Love didn't start and end. Who could say for sure what fate was? The goat horn girl was influenced by her family of scholars and felt that she would still find a scholar like her father in the future. The warm and handsome guy in the hall outside the house was good, but unfortunately, he wasn't her cup of tea. The little girl didn't have any intention of eavesdropping, so she withdrew her thin thoughts and subconsciously dipped her finger in her saliva. She gently flipped through the book and put it in her mouth before smacking it. Her mouth was filled with the fragrance of ink and she laughed to herself. Her parents always said that this habit of hers wasn't good, that it wasn't easy to collect books and that it was detestable to destroy books. However, how could this little girl care about these things? She wouldn't change even after repeated admonishment. In the hall, Chancellor Wang finally opened his mouth slowly. Don't think about victory, think about defeat first. Let's talk about the worst. Among the 600 people, the teachers and scholars are roughly divided into 2 and 8. Among them, a small half of the scholars from Xianxia have been sent by me to study and lecture in Old Shu, Jizhou, Xiangfan and other places using various excuses. Half of the teachers from Wuxia have opened private academies within 800 miles of Beiliang or have attached themselves to the local dignitaries. It's relatively easy for these people to enter Beiliang, but we can't rule out the possibility that the imperial court is secretly watching them. Once there's any movement, the imperial court will kill them and eliminate them. If these people are like this, don't even talk about those who are studying in the palace. The relationship between the Su and Zhao families has been exhausted. With such a large-scale migration, not to mention the difficulties of the prefectures and counties along the way, even Zhugo might be mobilized. This bunch of teachers and scholars who are not much better than delicate girls can't withstand a few trampling of iron hooves. To put it bluntly, a slightly elite Liang soldier can pick out a stick of candied haw with a thrust of his spear. Your Highness said that less than half of them have arrived in Beiliang. It's not an exaggeration to scare people. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "We'll deal with whatever comes our way." The Liang cavalry and Zhu Go, who are experts in assassination, are used to eating meat, but are our Beiliang secret agents vegetarians? When we were eating meat with big bowls back then, weren't they still eagerly waiting to drink soup on the side? My Shifu once specifically left a brocade pouch for us to deal with this matter, and now we've already begun to launch countermeasures. The geographical advantage is in Liang, but the weather, people, and peace are two different things. Although we can't say that it's all in Beiliang, it's still a bit better than the difficult situation of the past few years. First of all, when Beiliang dispatched troops to raid several towns on the border of Beimang, Second Sister even led troops to kill all the way to the capital of the southern dynasties, making Beimang exhausted from dealing with them. Then there was the devil Luo Yang, who spent a year brazenly going south last year, luring and killing countless iron cavalry and elite troops. Beiliang raised a large number of Jianghu dogs. In the past, they were used to guard against the infiltration of Beimang's Jianghu forces to the south, for fear that this group of desperados would not kill the heavily guarded powerful officials and meritorious deeds. They specifically selected the soft persimmons who were only at the threshold of the ranked class to assassinate them. Now, they could be transferred to Liang's borders. If Beimang dared to loot a burning house and tried to form a tacit understanding with the Zhao family, then they would let Su Shao fight again. Coincidentally, the newly appointed Protector General of Beiliang, Chu Lushan, and the cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong were both worrying about how to deal with the new officials. If Beimang were to be implicated, even Zhong Honggu and Yen Wenluan would be happy to see it happen. Moreover, Zhugo of Liang had ruthlessly killed a number of the top spies in Zhugo when Chao Chongqing was welcoming the princess. Now, it had not recovered its strength. Bailiang's death warriors were not good at fighting in battle formations, but they were still good at this kind of covert operations. If they were to fight Jianghu, they would barely not be at a disadvantage. Also, those elite death warriors who spent too much energy and effort to protect me can also be sent to coordinate with the military spies that Bailiang has long since established. Don't forget, the Bailiang cavalry is the best in the world mainly because of the scouts. If the Zhao family and the imperial court fall out with each other and do not hesitate to send more than 1,000 soldiers, then they can't blame them for kicking an iron plate. The old man sighed. When the time comes, this chessboard will be a scene of intersecting fangs. The old man withdrew his hands that were burned by the stove fire and rubbed his thin cheeks. Maybe there will be blood everywhere. Chapter 822. Su Fengnian said calmly, "You can't ask for a horse carriage but not feed the horse. There's no such good thing in the world. My Su family doesn't rebel or usurp the throne. We guard the northwest gate for your Zhao family. Ordinary people raise a dog to guard their house and still know how to give food. Zhao family, on the other hand, thinks all day long about this dog whose only weakness is that it doesn't know how to wag its tail and beg for mercy. They quickly starve its fur and bones and then find a good time to stew a pot of dog meat and eat to their heart's content. Even a cornered dog knows how to jump over a wall, let alone the Bailiang cavalry that rolled out of blood." Su Fengnian suddenly smiled and put down the girl's old boots that he had already roasted. He used an iron tongs to poke at the charcoal fire. "However, if I were the son of Zhao or the crown prince, I would also be on tenterhooks towards the Su family. How can I allow others to snore beside my bed? It's just that understanding is one thing, but if you want me to accept it, it's absolutely impossible." The old man smiled knowingly and no longer called Su Fengnian Your Highness. He became more intimate. "You brat, your words are quite reasonable, but your actions are skewed." Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. "It's not easy to be the head of the household. Children who make noise get candy. If you don't make a scene and roll around a few times, how can other people take you seriously?" Chancellor Wang chuckled. "Then how can it be even better?" Su Fengnian followed suit and his eyebrows became more relaxed. He laughed heartily. "Speaking of this makes me feel better." Unexpectedly, the old man shook his head. "I have to pour cold water on you first. Let's assume that more than half of the 600 people will make it to Bailiang alive. Have you ever thought about what will happen when there are too many monks and too little porridge? All the scholars in the world are watching how Bailiang will settle these people down. Bailiang's land is narrow and barren. Although there are many official hats, they can't be given away casually. If you give away too many, the official hats won't be worth anything. After you've settled down, no one will be willing to continue working hard for you. Besides, the local forces in Bailiang had their roots intertwined, and most of them were military families that emerged from the Spring and Autumn War. When a dispute arose, who would they side with? Blindly favoring someone was destined to be inhumane. Those who were favored grew more and more greedy, while those who were neglected grew jealous and resentful. The most difficult part about this was that it wasn't just the blood-stained military affairs that were annoying, it was also the trivial family affairs that were disgusting. I know that after you took over Chen Jibao, you began to deliberately change the image of a foppish young master in Bailiang. Especially that group of veteran soldiers who have been through hundreds of battles changed their opinion of you. It was not easy. Aren't you afraid that this time, when you set up your own school and enter Bailiang, your efforts will be in vain? Scolding you for being an embroidered pillow who squanders money?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "As a married woman, the happiest thing in life is not only being able to see eye to eye with your husband, but also two things that are extremely important. The father-in-law is impartial, and the mother-in-law is considerate. Bailiang is thirsty for talented people, but there are many fine horses, but there aren't many Bo Lu. Without the hundreds of people from Shangyin School, didn't the Su family gain a firm foothold in Bailiang? Didn't they beat Beimang until Beimang couldn't raise its head? As for the local tyrants of Bailiang, there are many things that Su Shao can't do. I don't mind being the bad guy at all. You have a good relationship with Su Shao, and you rely on this relationship to take advantage of the common people in Bailiang. But you don't have that kind of relationship with me, Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian didn't rely on them to get to where he is today. I'm not biased towards anyone. I'm just trying to reason with the local tyrant and the river dragon. Outside of northern Liang, I might not be able to reason with you. But in northern Liang, if you don't reason with me, I'll make sure you suffer the consequences of your actions. If you're a local tyrant, Then you can rely on your military exploits to become rich field showing or control the military affairs of various provinces and counties. It doesn't matter. These are all things you deserve. However, your table manners are too bad, and you've damaged the foundation of the Su family's wall. A hoe here and a hammer there dug dog holes, causing a perfectly sturdy wall to leak air from all sides. Don't blame me for using your corpses to fill the holes. If you are a local tyrant, as long as you don't pretend to be virtuous and do things honestly, you will have an official's hat, gold and silver, and you won't lack women. Baelyong's narrow territory also has its advantages, and that is, everywhere you go is under the Su family's nose. Everything you do can be seen. What the Su family does is nothing more than the word justice. As for the earnest advice, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you, old teacher. I think you will also be cursed behind your back. Chancellor Wang nodded and said, with justice and a woman's heart, this bunch of pitiful newlyweds who have lost their maternal families. As long as they are diligent and thrifty, they won't have to worry about not being able to make a name for themselves. There will definitely be bumps and bruises, but at least they won't be so miserable that they have to hang themselves and jump into a well. That's enough. They aren't delicate young ladies from influential families. As long as they have good in-laws who put themselves in their shoes, they will be able to endure hardships. Su Fengnian smiled and joked. The first time I saw old teacher playing against Su Xiao at the top of Mount Qingliang, your words were refined. It's probably because you are interacting with a vulgar person like me that your words are also vulgar. Old teacher shook his head and said self-deprecatingly, this is called choosing the right medicine for the illness depending on the person. Interacting with the king of Baelyong, the #1 boorish man in Liang, if I deliberately try to worm my way into being friends with him, I will have to deliberately put my arm around his shoulder and drink a lot of wine and eat a lot of meat. Wouldn't that make things difficult for this old man? Besides, the reason why the art of vertical and horizontal is also called the art of long and short is nothing more than using one's strong points against the enemy's weak points. Speaking of which, I would like to be bold enough to test His Royal Highness. What are the strengths and weaknesses of Baelyong and Liang? Su Fengnian said helplessly, old teacher, you will have to ask Su Beiji or Chen Shiliang about this. I am not willing to expose my own weak points. Does this count as grasping the surface of the art of long and short? Chancellor Wang gave a soft hum. Su Fengnian asked softly, this young lady's surname is Ouyang. Her grandfather's surname is Ouyang. He is from Takaoka. Has old teacher heard of him? Chancellor Wang said calmly, the young lady's father is half a student of mine. He doesn't think highly of Baelyong, so he won't follow her to Baelyong. Su Fengnian nodded. That was good too. Xianxia Academy had suffered such a big change. In order to calm the people down, the academy and the imperial court would definitely have a better life in the future with the knowledge of the goat-horned girl's father. Su Fengnian stood up. Then let's go. Chancellor Wang stood up and smiled. Aren't you going to say goodbye? Su Fengnian smiled. That girl hates tacky people. The two of them walked out of the house quietly. After Su Fengnian closed the door, he hung the jade pendant that he had stolen on the way on the grape rack. On the second day, the wind and snow stopped. A huge snowman that was as tall as a few people stood beside the Buddha's Palm Lake in Xianxia Academy. The goat-horned girl ran all the way to Yu Youwei's courtyard and screamed excitedly. Sister Yu, there is a huge snowman beside the lake. It looks like you. Chapter 823. A group of strange travelers appeared on the road. 8 of them were carrying a palanquin that was neither a bed nor a couch. It was similar to the palanquin used by the royal family of the old southern Tang Empire. A wide gauze canopy was added to the top of the palanquin. Vaguely, one could see the graceful figure of a woman behind the palanquin. She was an extremely seductive beauty. In front of the palanquin was a beautiful ceremonial official dressed in green. She was holding an ivory palanquin. Tied around her waist was a bag of golden silk fish made in the old southern Tang Empire. She seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact, she was gliding rather quickly. The 8 servants were unusually burly and walked as if they were flying. Even in the winter, they were bare-chested. Compared with the young and delicate ceremonial official, they were even more eye-catching. Beside the palanquin was a middle-aged machete man with a black veil on his head. His beard was so long that it was almost impossible for him to be so arrogant. On the official road, most of the people who dared to be so ostentatious were high-ranking officials and dignitaries. If they were Wulin people, then they would be extraordinary. Today's Jianghu was divided by the so-called heroes. Compared to the martial artists of the spring and autumn period, they could not be mentioned in the same breath. Even the top sect of Jianghu, Dragon Tiger Mountain, which had the same surname as the emperor, was in the wilderness, and Prime Minister Xianxia was in the court. The north and south were in harmony with each other, but they did not dare to be arrogant. This group of people was so maverick that they attracted a lot of attention on the road. Among them was a pair of young palanquins who had just met each other. They rode their horses separately. The older palanquin was riding an inferior horse. He reined in the horse to make way for them. With an envious face, he whispered to his companion, "Look, they must be like us. They are going to participate in the martial arts assembly at the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. If I'm not wrong, they should be the second to none dragon palace in the old southern Tang Empire. Only they dare to show such an overstepping and violating etiquette. They have no choice." The palace master of the Dragon Palace is the wet nurse of the youngest son of the king of Yanqi, with the support of such a powerful vassal king in the dynasty. Even the Jidushi who held the tiger tally in the southern Tang Empire would not say anything. I heard that this generation of the Dragon Palace has a talented woman. Hey, if she takes a fancy to me, my life will be worth it. Not to mention her, any of the fairies in the Dragon Palace would do. Huang Liang's companion was a young, white-haired nobody. Huang Liang was poor, and he was not a generous man. He did not manage to earn any money this year, so he was living a poor life. Earlier, he met this young man drinking alone in a small town. He shamelessly asked Huang Liang to bring him along, and when he heard that a martial arts assembly was going to be held at Snowfall Mountain Villa, he asked Huang Liang to bring him along. Huang Liang did not have to worry about food and drink along the way, and was lucky enough to stay in a first-class room in a few luxurious inns. Therefore, he began to see Su Qi in a new light. To be precise, he was impressed by Su Qi's wealth, and in his heart, he still regarded this generous man as a fool. Huang Liang was happy to consider himself an experienced Jianghu veteran, and showed him some of the Jianghu stories he had heard. At this time, when he saw Su Qi's confused face after hearing about the Dragon Palace and the King of Yen, it confirmed his view of this kid as a newborn calf. He took off the wine bag that Su Qi bought with money from his waist, raised his head and took a big gulp. Then he wiped it with his sleeve and said with a smile, "If you haven't heard about the Dragon Palace, then I'll have to explain it to you. In the Jianghu world of Liang, not to mention the Dragon Tiger Mountain, the Wu family, the Sword Tomb, and the 2 Zen temples, which came out of the secular world at will, are too far away from Jianghu. The real first-class schools that can be called the peak of Jianghu are the Sword Pool of Dongyue, the Bull Gang of the Shenyuan family, the Wild Goose Castle on the border of Jizhou, the Spring Invitation Cottage in western Shu, and then the Dragon Palace and the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. As for the third-class schools and gangs, most of them are influential figures in a province. It's not very nice to say that they are third-class, but they can't be underestimated. Generally, they have 1 or 2 grandmasters as their stabilizing force. There's no need to talk about the 4th class and the bottom class sections. I was once valued by a big shot in the Pure Heart Pavilion, which was one of the best in the county. He saw that I had a good foundation and was expected to be a direct disciple. Unfortunately, I was snatched away by a government official who wanted to practice martial arts. That bastard is not serious about practicing martial arts. He's just a dog in the latrine pit. Apart from hurting a few senior and junior sisters, he doesn't show up in the sect more than a few times a year. Chapter 824. As expected, the young chick beside him, who had just entered Jianghu and did not know the dangers of Jianghu, looked indignant, as if he wanted to fight for justice for Huang Liang. This made Huang Liang, who was wearing a heavy expression, laugh inwardly. It was true, and Pure Heart Pavilion was a famous sect in Jianghu, but that person was not Huang Liang. He had heard from the gossip of the people in the city that the young man who was swapped had a miserable end. He had only said a few angry words, but his hands and feet were broken by a group of retainers on the same day. It was also in this harsh winter that he was thrown to the roadside like a dead dog. Su Qi, or Su Fengnian, looked up and saw the 8-barreled palanquin flying away like a swan treading on the snow. After leaving Shangyin Academy, Su Fengnian did not go with Chancellor Wang. However, with Yuan Zuozong in the light and Chu Lushan in the dark, there should not be any mistakes. If there was no accident, this was probably the last time he had the mood to wander around Jianghu. Su Fengnian wanted to return to Beiliang alone, so he did not even bring Wu, the man of sacrifice, with him, which made him very sad when he parted. According to Huang Liang, Jianghu was finally annoyed and no longer lifeless. The reason was that the Dongyue sword pool, which had a high status among the first-class sects, took the lead, and the spring invitation cottage of Western Shu agreed. They asked the Quick Snow Mountain Villa to be the host, intending to choose a person who could convince the masses to sit on the throne of the Wulin alliance that had been vacant for decades. The reappearance of the devil cult, the emergence of their disciples and grand-disciples, and Mad Monk's journey to the east, had gradually caused the entire Jianghu to show signs of magnificence. Su Fengnian did not look at the ripples on the water, wondering if the Dongyue sword pool and the spring invitation cottage had been instructed by the imperial court to imitate Bailiang and start to reorganize the forces in Jianghu. Dongyue sword pool had been the imperial court's dog-beating stick for years, beating anyone who was not convinced. After Chen Zhibao entered Shu, the spring invitation cottage had been flirting with each other openly. Now that Chen Zhibao was the minister of war and would be crowned king in 2 years, it was reasonable for them to be restless. While Su Fengnian was lost in thought, the ceremonial officer of Dragon Palace who was holding the tablet turned around and walked toward him. Her footsteps were light and agile, leaving no trace on the ground. In the eyes of ordinary Jianghu people, it would be feared. In Jianghu, old monks, old Taoists, and old nuns would not provoke them if they could. Moreover, the beautiful woman in green in front of him was outstanding. Since she dared to enter Jianghu, especially those heroines who fought alone, she must have some strange martial art skills. The graceful and moving woman held a plain white elephant tablet with both hands and bowed to Su Fengnian. She did not look like a woman from a poor family from an aristocratic family who curtsied. Indeed, it was in line with her ceremonial official attire, as if she was a courtier greeting each other. When she raised her head, the corners of her mouth lifted slightly. She looked at Su Fengnian, who was riding on the horse, and said in a pleasant voice, "My family's miss invites you to the imperial carriage for a chat." Huang Liang opened his mouth in surprise. His heart was filled with jealousy, and his mood immediately became gloomy. When a Jianghu man with no family background married into a prestigious sect and brought home a beautiful woman and countless secret manuals, most of them would not find it shameful. Instead, they would regard it as a wonderful thing. For example, drunken sword Zhao Hongdan married into a rich family and brought home a beautiful woman, like a rootless duckweed planted in a fertile garden. His sword cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. Without hesitation, Su Fengnian dismounted from the horse and led it away. Huang Liang wanted to rise to the top like he always did when the beautiful ceremonial officer took a step forward and shook her head. This made Huang Liang, who had just dismounted from the horse, want to dig a hole and hide in it. Fortunately, Su Qi, who had stepped on dog poop, did not turn his head, and the beautiful woman did not ridicule him. Instead, she turned and led the way. The palanquin stopped quietly at the side of the road. The beautiful ceremonial officer squatted in front of the palanquin and stretched out her hand. She looked up and signaled Su Fengnian to step on her hand, and she would help him enter the palanquin. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. He just handed the reins to her and asked, "The soles of my shoes are a little dirty. Is it okay to dirty your lady's tent?" The beautiful ceremonial officer, who was leading the horse with one hand and holding the tablet with the other, smiled gently and said, "It's okay. After you enter the tent, I'll help you take off your shoes." The bearded man frowned. He held the saber in his hand and stared at Su Fengnian covetously. Su Fengnian faced the gauze tent, cupped his fist and said, "Su Fengnian has disturbed fairy." She then tiptoed and slipped into the gauze curtain. The woman was in her 30s and had a dignified appearance. However, even though she was kneeling on the ground, one could still vaguely see that her legs were long and slender. The side of her round buttocks that were squeezed out from her kneeling posture were even more alluring. Only an old flower expert would know the uniqueness of a woman's figure. Seeing Su Fengnian enter the tent, the woman smiled politely and gracefully. She quietly added a piece of spice into a thick, glazed green porcelain stove beside her. Su Fengnian did not bother the ceremonial officer to take off his shoes. Instead, he took them off himself. The ceremonial officer had already put away the tablet and handed Su Fengnian's horse to the bearded man. She took the strange man's boots with both hands. There was no difference on her pretty face. The incense burner was slightly tipsy, which was originally used for lavender to avoid filth. Su Fengnian took off the hook and let down the gauze curtain. He sat cross-legged with the fairy of the Dragon Palace. She did not speak. Su Fengnian glanced at the incense burner out of the corner of his eye. The incense burner was painted with pictures of swords. Under the fragrance, The porcelain surface flowed like a lake, like a lifelike picture of a swordsman wielding his sword. This incense burner was vaguely a superior swordsmanship manual. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. Jianghu people said that the Dragon Palace had all kinds of treasures and was as rich as a country. They were once a big parasite of the old southern Tang. The woman, who might have been a married woman, smiled and asked, "Do you also practice swordsmanship?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Yes, I have. May I know why Fairy asked me to take the carriage?" The woman stared at Su Fengnian and said calmly, "Do you know a prophecy left by the first-generation founder of the Dragon Palace?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "My knowledge is shallow. I don't know." The woman did not mind and said, "It's hard to paint the skin but not the bones. You may know the face but not the heart. Our Dragon Palace has always been famous for drawing tigers and dragons. We are also good at observing people's bones." Su Fengnian spouted nonsense. "When I was young, the fortune-teller said that I would either become a hero or be hacked to death by a hero in the future. He estimated that my bone structure was not bad. Fairy, how could you tell from so far away? Then Fairy of the Dragon Palace, you really have the ability of an immortal." The woman was obviously otherworldly. She was not used to such vulgar words and did not know how to respond. For a moment, there was only the fragrance and the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Chapter 825. Su Fengnian did not intend to pretend to be deaf and mute all the way to the Snow Villa. He smiled and said, "I have never heard of the words of the founder of the Dragon Palace, but I have heard that the Dragon Palace has a treasure called the Black Flower Cloud Dragon Pattern Censer. It symbolizes the eternal stability of the Southern Tang dynasty. Its outer wall is covered with black and purple spots. Once it is put into the censer and it burns, the mist will rise and the image of 9 dragons coming out of the sea will appear." Upon hearing this, the woman smiled. Her appearance was not eye-catching, but it set off her classical temperament and made her even more outstanding. She said softly, "Young Master Su is indeed the son of an official. Ordinary landowning households would not know of this Southern Tang's treasure." Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Is the Dragon Palace competing for the position of the Wulin Alliance?" The woman asked, "Young Master, do you think the Dragon Palace is qualified to compete for the Jianghu?" Su Fengnian waved his hand and said self-deprecatingly, "I don't dare to criticize." The woman was bending down to pick up the censer with copper chopsticks. She paused and glanced at Su Fengnian. After putting it into the censer, she seemed to have nothing to say. When Su Fengnian staggered and fell to the ground, she, who had been quietly holding her breath, waved her hand slightly to disperse some of the fragrance. She changed from kneeling to squatting. Her 2 fingers stopped at the tip of Su Fengnian's nose. She said to herself, "You even know that the Black Flower Censer secretly came from the Southern Tang Imperial Palace to the Dragon Palace. How can you not know that our sect is good at making human skin puppets with suitable bone structure? You should know that one of the 4 grandmasters, Fu Jianghongjia, was born in the Dragon Palace." The woman stared at Su Fengnian's face and sneered, "You are really calm." While speaking, her 2 fingers were like the tip of a sword and her fingertips were like the tip of a sword. She fiercely poked Su Fengnian's eyes. Her fingertips were not too far away from his eyelids, but the man still did not move. The woman said, "Did he really faint?" The woman who did not retract her fingers had a flash of ruthlessness in her eyes. Just as her killing intent was flowing, Su Fengnian was still lying, but one hand held the woman's fingers and the other hand was strangling her neck. The woman was stunned. The first 2 probing was just a pretense. The 3rd time was the real killing intent. For the Dragon Palace, a good skin was priceless. No matter whether the man on the ground fainted or not, it did not stop her killing intent. The cat and mouse play. The cat and mouse. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and stared at the fairy of the Dragon Palace with a vicious heart. He chuckled softly and said, "You really want to kill me? I have given you a chance to be the compassionate Guanyin. It is good for us to meet by chance and love each other." The woman was speechless. Her eyes were full of horror. A few small red snakes slowly slithered on the arm of the man with a head full of white frost. Then they suddenly pierced into her arm like a glutton. The gentle woman who was originally covered with the water vapor of the south of the Yangtze River quickly withered. When Su Fengnian let go of her, she had already silently stopped breathing. He supported her leaning body with one hand and gently tapped her temples with the other. He slowly tore off a delicate mask. Under the mask was the face of the blue-green ceremonial official who walked in front of the 8 palanquins. After a long illness, he became a doctor. He had used a lot of masks that were related to witchcraft during his trip to Beimang. He was not a layman when it came to the art of disguise. Su Fengnian threw away the face that was equivalent to the rooting level of Shu Xiao. After laying the body flat, he picked up the spatula and skillfully scraped off some incense ashes. When it came to pretending to be cultured, what was he not good at as the son of Bailiang? Su Fengnian turned his head and casually glanced at the ceremonial official, with the southern Tang-style silk fish hanging from his waist. The latter was indifferent to the corpse. His smile did not diminish and his eyes were playful. Su Fengnian asked, "Who is she? Who are you?" The blue-green lady stretched out a finger and stroked her temples. She squinted her eyes and said softly, "She is the current me. My real appearance is uglier than the one you took off. I don't dare to show my face to others." Su Fengnian put back the spatula. The mysterious lady said straightforwardly, "Originally, I thought that the journey to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa was boring and I wanted to make a new puppet to relieve my boredom. Now I feel that it is too wasteful. Why don't you come to the Dragon Palace and be a tripod furnace? Many men in Jianghu dream of it. Although it will dry up and be abandoned in 3 to 5 years, it is still much better than being made into a human skin puppet. Most of the women in the Dragon Palace are as beautiful as flowers and jade. They sing every night and enjoy happiness for several years. Even if you are a pewter spearhead, you can still have fun with 20 or 30 fairies. It is better than living a boring life with 1 or 2 old women." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Miss, where does your confidence come from?" The lady tilted her head and asked, "Are you the emperor of Liang's family?" Su Fengnian shook his head. The lady asked again, "Have you reached the 1st grade of Vajra realm, or have you comprehended the mystery of finger mystery?" Su Fengnian still shook his head. The lady asked, "Then are you the son-in-law of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu or Gu Jiantang?" Su Fengnian was amused. He laughed and said, "Are you done asking?" The 8 palanquins sank a few feet in an instant. The 8 strong and burly retainers knelt down almost at the same time. Su Fengnian's left hand grabbed the lady's face like hooks. The lady's face was bleeding. His right hand slowly rotated and several flying swords were nailed into her vital acupoints. If she dared to use qi to resist, she would be nailed to death on the spot. Su Fengnian slightly increased the strength of his 5 fingers. Perhaps the lady's face was covered with blood and she was gasping for breath. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Do you really think you are invincible just because of the fake Vajra secret skill of the Dragon Palace?" The reason why the Dragon Palace was able to stand tall was because of the snake entangling tortoise, which was derived from the red armor of the Talisman General, and a few shortcut Xian finger skills. In the end, it was neither a donkey nor a horse. It was a laughingstock. How many genuine level 1 masters would take these women seriously? If you want to be a master like Wang Xianji, you can't do it with the unorthodox methods of the Dragon Palace. In the past, your palace master tried to give herself to Wang Xianji to take Yang to nourish Yin. As a result, she was slapped into a pulp by old monster Wang before she could take off her clothes. In my opinion, if a lady is too ugly, she shouldn't be in Jianghu. The lady gnashed her teeth and said, "Who are you? Why do you know so much about the secrets of the Dragon Palace?" Su Fengnian loosened his 5 fingers and smiled without saying a word. The lady, who was decisive, shouted outside the gauze tent, "Keep going!" The lady, who was waiting for an opportunity to reward the white-haired young man with a mystery of finger skills, spat out a mouthful of blood without warning. It turned out that a flying sword had penetrated her body. The green flying sword circled back to its master's fingers. Su Fengnian sneered, "Still not giving up?" The lady stuck out her tongue to lick away the blood and swallowed it along with her saliva. Her eyes were cold and she said in a charming tone, "What a good sword manipulation art of the Wu family sword tomb." Su Fengnian pointed at his white hair and said with a smile, "Based on this and the turmoil in Great Peace City, you actually guessed my identity but didn't dare to say it? Afraid that I would kill you?" The lady was silent. Su Fengnian asked directly, "This time, the Dragon Palace went to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa to join in the fun. Did the king of Yanqi, Zhao Bing, and Nalan Yusi ask you to do anything?" The lady was expressionless. She seemed to have accepted her fate and was waiting for death. The 2 of them were only a few feet apart. Su Fengnian changed his attitude faster than flipping the pages of a book. He slapped his palm on her forehead. The woman's body was strangely still. Only her head shook for a long time. Blood flowed out of her 7 orifices. The concealed qi that she had gathered with great difficulty suddenly burst out. She covered her mouth. Scarlet blood seeped out from between her fingers and dripped onto the carpet. Su Fengnian slapped the lady's face with his right hand. Her head swayed to the left. She tried to move to the right because she could clearly feel a flying sword with undisguised cold sword energy hovering near her right ear. She did not want to have her head pierced by a sword for no reason. But Su Fengnian hit her when she was down. After the slap, he pressed his hand against her swollen cheek and pushed it towards the tip of the flying sword. This caused the resilient lady's heart to die in that instant. Her life was hanging by a thread. It was not a good feeling to be so close. The lady closed her eyes. The man's palm was warm, but the flying sword near her ear was cold and piercing. The tip of the sword happened to touch her temple. A drop of blood slowly flowed down her pretty cheek. After opening her eyes, she sneered. "Why? Are you worried that the secret skill of the Dragon Palace will die with me once I crush the pearl?" Su Fengnian flicked his finger on her cheek. The flying sword returned to his sleeve. He said casually, "The ladies of the Dragon Palace are like clams. Their cultivation varies. The pearls they cultivate are also different in size. The small pearls are as small as a grain of rice. They follow the flow of qi. The big pearls are as big as the Lingnan dragon eye. They turn into Taoist gang qi and occupy the dantian." The lady spat out a mouthful of blood. Su Fengnian stretched out his palm and easily blocked it. He glanced at the black-purple blood in his palm. It seeped into his skin and disappeared in a flash. He frowned. The lady laughed crazily. Chapter 826. Su Fengnian laughed. It's not good for some skills to be too famous. Just like the go set by a top national player, its first appearance is usually earth-shattering. Over time, there will be a way to break it. South of the southern Tang, the weather is gloomy, the sun is abundant, and the plants and springs all contain evil qi. The human qi is connected to the heaven and earth, so it naturally produces miasma. The Dragon Palace has been rooted in southern Xinjiang for a long time, so they fight poison with poison. They collect grass miasma in March, yellow plum miasma in May, and sweet osmanthus miasma in September. They are neither smoke nor fog, but they are mixed into the bloodline. When you spit it out, it is called dragon saliva, especially the blood essence. Even if you are a top expert, as long as you don't have the physique of a Vajra realm, your body will rot after a drop of it. The woman stopped smiling, raised her sleeve to cover her face, and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She even looked shy and coquettish. She stared at the nobleman who was familiar with many secrets of the Dragon Palace. "If you insist on killing me, I'll destroy both jade and common stone. If we talk nicely, maybe we can both be happy." Su Fengnian raised his palm, and the dragon saliva was forced out of his palm. The woman didn't panic and fell into deep thought. Su Fengnian sat near the incense burner and sighed. "You really have an exquisite mind. If I were an ordinary person, even if I could suppress the dragon saliva, which is ranked in the top 5 of the southern borders Gu arts, with the incense biscuits in the incense burner that require a guiding medicine, I'm afraid that when I bargain with you, I'll be dead." Also, the bearded man outside the palanquin was just a camouflage. He hasn't reached the first stage, and is at most a second stage master. Previously, when the 8 servants were forced to kneel, one of them didn't have to kneel, but he still hesitated and covered it up. "It's really tiring to deal with you." Traps were set everywhere, and she was suppressed everywhere. No matter how determined the woman was, she finally showed signs of collapsing. She only heard the unfathomable young devil say something, which made her scratch her head in confusion. "Do you want to have a taste of being skinned by a cat back in the days when the talisman General Red Armor was still alive? My technique is still immature, and I'm still trying to figure it out. Why don't you put up with it?" Su Fengnian reached out and brushed the gauze curtain, pulling out a few white threads that were floating between his fingers. Her voice trembled as she said, "I admit defeat." Su Fengnian smiled. His eyes were so sinister that she felt like she was the merciful goddess of mercy. The skin on her face was torn off by Beth. She lowered her head and held her bloody face. She said hoarsely, "Yang Maoyang, Zhao Weiping, step back." In the Jianghu, if there was good fortune, there would also be bad fortune. He might obtain a secret manual for no reason, or he might be taken in as a disciple by an otherworldly expert. It was also possible that he would be half-crippled by an eccentric hermit expert without doing any evil deeds, or he would fail miserably in an easy task, and his reputation would be destroyed overnight. This was the allure of Jianghu. You would never know what kind of changes and opportunities you would encounter tomorrow. Generally speaking, the higher one's cultivation level, the smaller the variables. However, as long as one encountered one, it would be more difficult to resolve. Not to mention finding a needle in a haystack, there were only a handful of level 2 Master Realm Masters in each province. They rarely met each other and minded their own business. However, once a death grudge was formed, one side would usually end up in a miserable state. Su Fengnian stretched out a white thread and looked down. He didn't look at the woman who didn't have any arrogance at all. He said calmly, "I hope you can tell me everything you know." As they approached the Snow Mountain Villa, the 8 palanquins turned into the private road of the villa from the official road. The road became wider, and the snow was mostly cleared. One could see that the road stretched on. Close to 100 boys and girls with delicate features held brooms with silk handles. There were also managers of the villa welcoming them at the entrance. Every time a reputable person in Jianghu sent an invitation, there would be loud cheers from the villa. The 8-barreled palanquin and an ox cart entered at the same time. The driver had an arrogant expression on his face. He was obviously a child who had just entered the school to learn how to read and write, but he carried a long sword with a dense sword aura on his back. Behind him sat an old Confucian scholar in plain clothes. He had the air of an immortal, and in his hand was an elegant and refined item that famous scholars would carry when they talked about it. Ordinary people would look at him with respect, and he really had an otherworldly temperament. Along the way, many Jianghu people who entered the private path of the villa hurriedly made way for him. As for some famous heroes who had the courage to approach and greet him, the old Confucian scholar sitting in the ox cart kept his eyes closed and did not pay any attention to them. The Jianghu heroes who had hot faces but cold butts did not have the slightest dissatisfaction with this, and only felt that it was natural. The Snow Mountain Villa took the initiative to take on a heavy responsibility this time and spent money to organize this Jianghu event. In the end, they still had to look at the faces of the other 2 families. One was the Dongyue sword pool, which was strong enough to compete with the sword tomb of the Wu family for the title of the World Sword Forest. The other was the remote Shishu Spring Invitation Cottage. The former had sent Li Yibai, who was expected to be the next leader of the sword pool, and 18 sword servants. There were only 2 of them, but they were undoubtedly more important. The old Confucian scholar holding the tail of the bamboo stick was the current master of the Spring Invitation Cottage, Xianxia. His cultivation was unfathomable, and he had never fought with anyone in his life. However, it was said that the Confucian scholar who could exchange swordsmanship with the sword emperor of Shishu was only capable of condemning people in speech and writing. There was an uproar on the road. The 8 palanquins of the Dragon Palace and the ox cart of the cottage came into view. Then, another group of eye-catching people came into view. 18 female swordsmen in the same style of fox fur rode on white horses. Their sleeves were as white as snow, and they looked like fairies. Even their scabbards were as white as snow. It was an eye-opener. For generations, the Dongyue sword pool would choose young girls with spiritual chi sword embryos and carefully nurture them into sword servants. These girls had to remain virgins for life. They were swords and also chastity for the sword pool. However, the Snow Mountain Villa didn't see the Dongyue sword pool's self-proclaimed genius of swordsmanship, Li Yibai. There were 3 riders riding side by side. In the middle of them was a young man who looked spirited and bright, full of vitality. The rider on the left was dressed in black and had a horizontal blade at his waist. He had a cold expression and was tall and strong. His hair was slightly curled, and he looked heroic. The rider on the right was much inferior to his 2 companions. He had a short sword at his waist. He looked ordinary, had dark skin, and was short. When the man in the middle appeared on the private road of the Snow Mountain Villa, a large group of girls who had been waiting for a long time suddenly screamed. They shouted the words, "Qing Bai," with infatuation in their eyes. The young rider in black laughed softly and said, "Brother Qian, you're still in such high demand. Let me see. Oh, there really are a few beauties. Why don't you give some of them to me?" The handsome young man blushed. The black-clothed swordsman laughed and reached out to rub his face. "Brother Qian, oh Brother Qian, your skin is even thinner than a girl's." When the girls saw this scene, they were even more obsessed. The young man with the surname Qian, who was called Qing Bai, braced himself and purposely turned a blind eye. He brushed past the girls who adored him. His surname was Qian and his given name was Laifu. The surname Qian was a common surname, and the two words Laifu were far from Yangchun by Shui. It was really interesting that such an elegant young man was given such a tacky name by his parents. In fact, Qian Laifu was born in the Lianghui aristocratic family. 200 years ago, it was a big family that even the emperor's daughter hated to marry. Now, it could be considered a prosperous family, especially Qian Laifu. He was good at making Qingbai scholars' paper, imitating the Xianxia hall in Shu. It was far better than the craftsmen of the Rui Pavilion in the capital. Even the Suzhou, Wu weaving bureau could not compare. At first, he wrote poems for the Ichuan invitations in the inner hall of the palace to fill in the blanks on the walls and pillars. He was known as the flower of the palace. Later, it evolved to the point that all the ministers of the imperial court used this paper. He was also good at writing graceful poems, which were extremely sentimental and lingering. In the scholarly circles, he was known as the four little families of the literary world, along with the down-and-out young phoenix of the song family, Wang Chudong, who wrote The First Snow on the Spring God Lake, and Su Weisheng of Beiliang. Each of them had their own strengths, and Su Weisheng won first place. Not to mention the many noble ladies in the Liang dynasty who admired Qian Laifu, who was known as Qingbai. There were also many heroines in the Jianghu who threatened to marry only him. On the 8 palanquin, Su Fengnian was sorting out his thoughts. The woman beside him, Lin Hongyuan, was actually the next palace master of the Dragon Palace. She admitted that this trip to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa was ordered by the King of Yen. Her main purpose was to help Li Yibai of the Dongyue Sword Pool to become the Wulin Alliance leader. For this, the Dongyue Sword Pool secretly gave the Dragon Palace 6 ancient treasured swords. Su Fengnian did not believe all of it. Lin Hongyuan's words were almost 90% true and 10% false, which was enough. This time, in the fight for the position of Wulin Alliance leader, Xianxia of the Spring Invitation Cottage was the most popular. Among the first-class sects, the Quick Snow Mountain Villa leaned towards the West Shu Cottage, which had been on good terms with them for generations. The sects and gangs in the southwest of Liang were also willing to join forces. However, it seemed that the young fort master of the Wild Goose Castle in Jianghu was also involved. This young lieutenant had an official status that no one dared to underestimate. There were also rumors that the young fort master of the Wild Goose Castle was very popular in the capital. He was brothers with the 2 sons of the former Minister of War, Gu Zhentang. He had even gone hunting with the first prince, Zhao Wu, many times. In addition, there were some stragglers, but compared to these 3 parties, they were not worth mentioning. However, the Wulin Alliance leader today was not like the past where they could not interact with the imperial court. As long as they became the alliance leader, it was almost equivalent to connecting with the imperial court and entering the emperor's sight. After being recruited, they could help the emperor govern the Jianghu. If this was not a great life-saving talisman, what was it? The cultural pulse of the Central Plains could still be connected, but unfortunately, the martial courage of the Jianghu had been broken. Su Fengnian said softly, the Spring Invitation Cottage, the Dongyue Sword Pool, and the Wild Goose Castle in Jianghu. They are all beautiful widows who can't keep their widowhood. There is someone secretly above. Chapter 827. The Suishue Mountain Villa was located on the shore of the God of Spring's South Lake, overlooking Hubei. The river was vast and majestic. After the heavy snow, the wonder of the sunset snow on the river was even more magnificent. The villa was built with ingenuity, and more than half of it was out of the lake. The Dragon Palace was as famous as the Suishue Mountain Villa in Jianghu. Living in the north, it was convenient to enjoy the lake scenery. The secluded courtyard was even more elegant and clean, which made people's hearts beat faster. The walls were painted white and the tiles were blue. Painters were hired to make freehand paintings on the inner and outer walls of the house. While walking through the corridors, Lin Hongyuan also saw a small and humorous butterfly in love with a flower at the top of the corridor, which made her a little surprised. The floor of the main building was covered with transparent glass. Fishes in the lake could be seen faintly, either alone or in groups. Even though Su Fengnian was experienced and knowledgeable, he still admired the Suishue Mountain Villa's value for money. Many noble families that rose and prospered after the spring and autumn period didn't lack money, but they didn't have such a foundation. Many of the buildings were pieced together, and experts could see the difference between noble families and aristocratic families at a glance. Lin Hongyuan, whose face was torn off, went to tidy herself up and put on a clean set of clothes. Su Fengnian, who was squatting on the glass floor and counting fishes, looked up and was stunned. It was a young woman with thick eyebrows and big eyes. She wasn't stunning, but because her eyebrows and eyes were rare, she was not easy to forget. Su Fengnian didn't have a good impression of the Dragon Palace. She was just a servant girl kept by the number one of the left of river, Nalan Yusi. This was also the reason why the two women dared to risk their lives on the 8-bar palanquin. After accidentally killing the heir of Bailiang, they had to act coquettishly to their master to take credit. Among the vassals of Liang, Zhao Bing, the king of Yanqi, was the only one who caught Su Zhao's eye. Whether it was the cavalry or the infantry, their combat power was the closest to the northern Liang. Since ancient times, in Nanjiang, the land of barbarians, the number of academies was actually the first in the dynasty. Zhao Bing's reputation was much better than that of Zhao Yi, the king of Guangling. Even if the sky was high and the emperor was far away, there was no news of any overstepping of authority. The imperial court adopted Sun Ping's last words and spared no effort to remove the vassals, but there were very few restrictions on the king of Yanqi in the imperial court. Several major parties, including Jianghu, unanimously praised the government affairs of Nanjiang. This was probably all thanks to Nalan Yusi's smoothness. Huang Sanjia once commented on all the strategists in the world, saying that Nalan Yusi, a small country under the rule of Jianghu, was well versed in the imperial court. Lin Hongyuan looked at the white-haired man who glanced at her and then lowered his head to tap on the glass again. If she could, she would not hesitate at all. She would chop off his limbs, cut off his eyeballs, make him deaf, and then force him to be mute. She would turn him into a human puppet and put him in a big vat, making him live a life worse than death for decades. But the problem was that Lin Hongyuan had no chance of winning at all. She was taught by her mother and had been scheming and vicious since she was a child. But there was one thing she learned from her good-for-nothing father. Su Fengnian suddenly said, "When you return to the Dragon Palace, either Nalan Yusi will beat around the bush or the Prince of Yen will ask you about the details of our daily life. If you want to live a better life in the future, you should be more careful now." Lin Hongyuan moved a chair to sit on the edge of the glass floor. She raised her arm, put 2 fingers together, and slowly wiped her eyebrows. She smiled and said, "Young Master Su is really a good person who repays evil with good." Su Fengnian said calmly, "I know a little about Xianxia from the cottage. Li Yibai from the Dongyue sword pool and Li Huali from the Yanbao fort in Jizhou. I haven't heard much about these 2 young talents. Tell me more about them." Lin Hongyuan took off his boots and sat cross-legged on the chair. His hands massaged the soles of his feet casually. After thinking for a while he said carefully, "I know Li Yibai better. When he traveled thousands of miles with his sword, he came to the Dragon Palace. I also accompanied him to the south border, almost to the South Sea. His swordsmanship is superb. Because he came from the sword forest sacred ground, he naturally has a good understanding of swordsmanship. Time after time, he sharpens his swordsmanship and points to the key points. Gradually, he has the aura of an ancient sword fairy. If it weren't for his plain appearance, I might have fallen in love with him. However, Li Yibai has a weakness. He cultivates the out-of-the-world swordsmanship, but he cultivates the out-of-the-world swordsmanship. Because the Dongyue sword pool and the Dongyue royal family are attached to the imperial court, they urgently need someone to stand out and stabilize the marriage between the sword pool and Liang. This is a knot in Li Yibai's heart. When he returned from the Lingnan Mountains, Li Yibai happened to get a sword manual of the Great Qin dynasty. I wonder how he has been practicing it these years. Young Master Su, you should know that the martial artists in Jianghu are not only afraid of the people of the 3 sects monopolizing the time, but also afraid of the new swordsmen stepping on the shoulders of the seniors in swordsmanship. Young Master Su, even if you have a great divine ability and even a few Lin Hong apes are no match for you, that's only because Lin Hong apes happen to be subdued by one thing. Li Yibai is different. Don't be careless and become his sword test stone." Chapter 828. At this point, Lin Hongyuan deliberately paused. She thought that this guy would be arrogant and neglectful. Unexpectedly, he nodded and pursed his lips, indicating that he understood. Lin Hongyuan suppressed the gloom in her heart and continued, "As for Li Huali, Wild Goose Castle in Ji Province has never had any relationship with the Dragon Palace. I only know that the Han family in Ji Province was killed by the imperial court. Wild Goose Castle, as one of the important towns in Ji Province's border, was once a trusted subordinate of the Han family. Their owner, Li Jinjiang, was suspected of betrayal, so Wild Goose Castle's reputation has never been good in Jianghu. Li Huali, who gained a lot of military exploits at the border, did not have any bad deeds in Jianghu. He only joined the army at the age of 14 or 15, and last year when he was 20, he was able to become a commandant with real power to command 6,000 people. Even 10 surplus generals can't compare with him. Presumably, Li Huali has his own advantages. Lin Hongyuan seemed to be amused by herself. She smiled and said, praising Li Huali's shrewdness in front of young Master Su, I really feel that I'm funny. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, if you want to be successful at the border, even if you're a descendant of a general, it's not easy to come by. Compared to the narcissistic Li Yibai, I care more about Li Huali. Lin Hongyuan sighed in her heart. She was disgusted and even loathed such an opponent. The more Su Fengnian acted contrary to the rumors of a hedonistic son of rich parents, the more fearful she was. Lin Hongyuan's mystical secret arts were endless, and she was adept at scheming. Even if her opponent was a first-grade Vajra realm expert, she would still dare to fight him head-on. There were 4 first-grade Vajra realm, and the threshold was as high as the Dragon Gate. Apart from the people of the 3 religions, the Vajra realm was the limit. Most people could only dream of reaching the Xian finger realm. If a martial artist stepped into the celestial phenomenon realm step by step, he would dare to challenge the saints of the 3 religions. In layman's terms, he would be willing to sacrifice himself to drag the emperor down from his horse. Su Fengnian stood up and asked, the Snow Villa will elect the Wulin Alliance chief the day after tomorrow. According to your estimation, how many people will come to join in the fun? Lin Hongyuan blurted out without thinking, there are at least 4,000 or 5,000 people, but the villa itself can only accommodate more than 200 people. Fortunately, there are many private villas, inns and taverns on the south side of the Spring God Lake, which can probably accommodate more than 1,000 people. The rest of the Wulin people have to live in the big and small towns 50 miles away, where good and bad people are mixed together. The only people who can really talk are the 200 or 300 guests who live in the Quickie Snow Villa. The villa must be happy and painful. The happy part is that the Quickie Snow Villa has never been the focus of the world. It welcomes guests from all over the world, which raises the status of the villa in Jianghu. The pain is that the 200 or 300 masters of various trades are not easy to serve. If something goes wrong, I'm afraid that a red light will turn into a white light. Whoever lives in a good yard, who lives in a bad yard, whose maids in the yard are more beautiful, will be personally received by the villa master. These people all have small calculations in their minds. It's easy to talk about the Dragon Palace who pays attention to them, but some of the gang leaders who are neither good nor bad, who don't have any big skills, but they pay attention to small schemes, which can be said to be endless. It's a test of the Quickie Snow Villa's ability to receive people. Su Fengnian glanced at Lin Hongyuan, who was at her fingertips, and invisibly compared her with Zi of Mount Huishan. They were really different. He smiled warmly and said, I didn't know that you know the ways of the world. Have you been managing the affairs of the Dragon Palace all these years? Lin Hongyuan laughed at herself and said, if it weren't for this delay and smiling apologetically every day, I would have been a real level 1 master. The door of the hall was opened. The bearded man Zhao Weiping stood at the door and knocked symbolically. Lin Hongyuan said indifferently, say it. The saber man who had worked for the Dragon Palace for many years said in a deep voice. It is said that a little celestial master came to Dragon Tiger Mountain, who first went to stop the crazy monk of the western regions, Zhao Ningxian. The only son of the Prince of Qingqing, Wu Shizhen, also visited the Snow Villa with Qiu Mian. Su Fengnian was no stranger to Zhao Ningxian, who once blocked Dong Tai's sword on the mountain. Wu Shizhen was even more so. When he went to Qingyang Palace on horseback, he had dealt with the father and son. Wu Shizhen was beaten to a pulp. Wu Lingsu was nominally a prince of Liang with a different surname. The Prince of Qingqing, who only used some unorthodox methods to charm the emperors and ministers, was not worth mentioning compared to Su Shao, the vassal king. Moreover, the armored ant and thousands of soldiers in Mount Qingqing were the secret chess pieces of his master, Li Yishan. On the contrary, Su Fengnian had never heard of Qiu Mian. Lin Hongyuan waved her hand to signal Zhao Weiping to leave. She wiped the soles of her white socks and took the initiative to say, Qiu Mian is a famous heroine in Jianghu in recent years. There are countless people under her skirt. She is beautiful. The clothes and jewelry she wears will quickly become popular in the north and south of the Yangtze River. Qiu Mian's reputation can be imagined. But this fairy's swordsmanship attainment is not even worthy of carrying shoes for young Master Su. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Whether or not her swordsmanship is worthy of carrying my shoes is another matter. Maybe I'm willing to bow down to her and line up with those Jianghu heroes to prostrate myself. Fairy Qiu wouldn't even be willing to look at me." Lin Hongyuan covered her mouth and smiled. Su Fengnian teased, "You just pinched the soles of your feet. Don't you think it is dirty?" After Lin Hongyuan smiled, her eyes curved into a pair of crescent moons. She stretched out her hand. "Smell it." Seeing that Su Fengnian was not amused, she stuck her finger into her mouth and licked it. Her gaze was provocative. Su Fengnian, who was still indifferent, smiled and said, "You want to compare your disgust with someone who often talks to a head full of lime? You are asking to be humiliated." Lin Hongyuan's eyes suddenly lit up. She straightened her waist, which was so thin that it could be grasped with one hand. She placed her hands on her legs and asked curiously, "I heard that you and Wudong's sect leader Hong Shixiang have known each other for many years. You even fought with Plum Wine, the invincible war saint? As long as you are willing, I will promise you anything. Even if I give my body to you, I will probably think that you are the one who lost out. In my life, I only admire these two strange men. If I were to live with one of them while the other forgot about Jianghu, even if I, Lin Hongyuan, became an immortal, I would not be willing." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh and did not respond. But when they left the hall and arrived at the waterfront corridor, the fog on the lake became thicker and thicker. The world was a vast expanse of whiteness. Su Fengnian leaned on the railing. Lin Hongyuan hurriedly put on her shoes and followed behind him. She was still unwilling to give up. If outsiders saw this scene, they would most likely mistake them for a pair of Jianghu sons and daughters. Su Fengnian said softly, "Say, if we kill Xianxia, Li Yibai, and Li Huali in one go, wouldn't it be very interesting?" Lin Hongyuan's expression was complicated. She asked in a low voice, "Can we kill them?" Su Fengnian laughed, "We will know after we try." Chapter 829. The mist on the surface of the lake was steaming, making it look like a fairyland. At this moment, a melodious and clear sound came from the mist. Lin Hongyuan pricked up his ears to listen to the sound of the flute, dissipating the bloody smell brought by Su Fengnian's shocking words. Lin Hongyuan was intoxicated by the sound and simply closed his eyes. He seemed to be a famous flute player. He murmured, "The Deer Waste Ridge under Mount Huey's Unia Mound is surrounded by many purple bamboos. I don't know why there are green bamboos. There are moss clinging to the bamboo legs. The bamboo shoots are extremely bitter and can't be eaten. They are also called bitter bamboo, but they are most suitable to be used as flutes. I have never heard of this little song before. Listening to it, my ears are full of bitterness. I don't know how bitter the flute player's heart must be. Bitter green, bitter green, bitter green. It's talking about this person and this flute." Su Fengnian didn't have as many feelings as Lin Hongyuan. He spoiled the mood and said, "According to your flattery, if the flute player is handsome, just imagine him blowing across the river with a bitter face. Then he will be able to seduce a passing heroine. She will probably be unable to resist holding him in her arms and loving him tenderly." Sure enough, after Su Fengnian's remarks, Lin Hongyuan leaned back against the railing and stroked his forehead helplessly. Su Fengnian twirled a strand of hair around his temples and asked, "How many people in the world do you think can wipe out the Snow Mountain Villa in one breath?" Lin Hongyuan's eyebrows trembled. After thinking seriously, he said, "Wang Xianji, Tuoba, and Dong Tai. It can't be more than that." Mr. Nayland said that in the past 500 years, other than Wang Xianji who can compete with Ancestor Lu, no one else can achieve this feat. Beimang's God of War was close behind in the martial arts evaluation, but he surpassed the other 8 people by a large margin. Of course, to be precise, he was behind the Peach Blossom Sword deity by 7 people. Even if other people became saints from the 3 sects, such as Chao Chongqing and the white-robed monk Li Xiaoxin, they would not be able to do it. This was because it went against their conscience. Once they entered sainthood, the heavenly phenomenon was too important. Once they went against the natural order, they would suffer a severe drop in their realm. For example, Li Dongxin had cut off the Yellow River and hung hundreds of feet of water on top of Taoism sect's head, so it would never fall on the innocent. Even if they were unwilling to surpass the North Sea, they could not do so. This was especially true for the reclusive masters of Buddhism. No one had ever heard of them appearing on the battlefield. The Taoist priests of Mount Longhu would only receive orders to open altars, set up rituals, and build auspicious Taoist temples to accumulate merits. How would they dare to kill the innocent? When it comes to Dong Tai, a carefree earth immortal, most of them will not lower themselves to the same level as ordinary people. Just like a strong man who sees a chicken pecking rice on the side of the road, he will not look for a stick to beat the chicken to death. If there is such a thing, it can only mean that there is something wrong with the guy's head. The crazy monk who sings wordless songs is one of them. Su Fengnian sighed softly. The sword is a good sword, but the person is not a good person. Lin Hongyuan was born with an exquisite heart. He immediately understood the meaning and asked carefully, could it be that the monk was an extremely brilliant swordsman before he shaved his head? Su Fengnian's elbow was on the railing while his other hand patted the railing lightly. He smiled. I'll give you a word of advice. I don't accept money. You are too smart and you will end up ruining your life. Lin Hongyuan smiled. I've learned something. But young master, you are being generous with other people's money. You have to know that I have also bought the first snow. Speaking of which, the talented woman who said this seems to live on the spring deity lake. If I am lucky enough not to die in your hands, I will definitely go and take a look at her face and ask her some questions that I have never been able to answer. When the time comes and I appear in front of her, I will definitely pretend to be virtuous, so as not to frighten the great master of the literary world that this little girl has admired for a long time. Lin Hongyuan's words were lively, like a familiar and amiable girl next door. Unexpectedly, after Su Fengnian gently patted the railing, he suddenly slammed the railing heavily. Lin Hongyuan staggered and fell to the ground. He covered his heart with both hands and his face was pale. He looked at the man who was talking and laughing just a moment ago with malice and anger in his eyes. Su Fengnian still rested his chin on his hand and looked down at the noble of the Dragon Palace, who seemed to have suffered an undeserved disaster. He said, the flute player is Zhao Ningxian. The flute sound is transparent, which is only pleasing to the ears for laymen. But you and I both know that many listeners do not mean it, but the flute player means it. He uses the flute sound to distinguish the level of the people on the lake after touching the ripples of Qi everywhere. You pretended to flatter me just to let me release my Qi to listen to the flute sound. Even if my identity will not be exposed for the time being, it will make the young Taoist priest of the Dragon Tiger Mountain think about it. I kindly give you a maxim not to be a smart aleck. Lin Hongyuan, whose qi was chaotic like boiling water, endured the piercing pain and asked bitterly, what kind of strange technique is this? You actually managed to take over my qi by relying on a simple beat? Su Fengnian smiled and said, there's no harm in telling you. I secretly learned from a blind female zither player in Beimang's 18 beats of the Hujia. Originally, I did not know the technique and only knew the form. Later, after a battle, I could be considered to have climbed to a higher position and looked further. Coincidentally, you were not sensible, so I played with you. Lin Hongyuan shouted crazily and sternly, Su Fengnian, what do you have to do with that human cat Han Diaoxi? Previously, the finger mystery technique that tore my face and peeled the cocoon was Han Diaoxi's unique skill. Now, the trick of seizing people's heart is clearly similar to Han Diaoxi's method of digging people's souls. Su Fengnian ignored the extremely angry woman and turned his head to look at the white fog in the lake. He said to himself, that cat's head is really a good thing. It's much better than the head of the fifth raccoon. A wisp of vermilion jumped up and down in the mist. It was silent, joyful, and wanton. Su Fengnian, who had been holding his cheeks, had a warm look in his eyes. Lin Hongyuan looked up at this time and happened to stare at his pair of red phoenix eyes. She was in a daze. How could one have both the handsome horse and the autumn wind in the north and the apricot flowers and misty rain in the south? How could this devil, who made her afraid, have such a warm side? Lin Hongyuan did not know what he saw or what he thought. At that moment, she only felt that if she could make him into a human puppet in this life, she must keep his eyes. Su Fengnian stood up and stretched his neck lazily. He bent down and looked into Lin Hongyuan's eyes. There are several kinds of pseudo-Xian finger skills in the Dragon Palace. I taught you one, so you have to teach me one. Lin Hongyuan felt anxious and miserable. She thought, then why don't you stand still and let me torment you until your ocean of qi is boiling? Let me beat you until you are half dead. She could only purse her lips tightly. Su Fengnian touched Lin Hongyuan's eyebrows with his fingertips. He did not have the posture of bargaining at all. He smiled and said, I have seen a lot of finger mystery techniques, but the more this thing the better. You, Lin Hongyuan, will be the woman of the master of the Dragon Palace in the future. You have a bright future. If you die in the Snow Mountain Villa for no reason, what else can you do except as a secret joke? I don't have a big appetite. I'm not asking you to say all of them. As long as there is one, we are even. How about it? Next, you have to complete the task given to you by Mr. Naylan. I will kill my people. Lin Hongyuan sneered and said, You can't kill me because you want this? Su Fengnian did not have the time to be gentle with her. With a light tap of his finger, Lin Hongyuan, who had been heavily hit between the eyebrows, crashed through the railing and fell into the lake. Then, she seemed to be kicked back to the outer corridor by a water ghost, becoming a drowned rat in the middle of winter. Su Fengnian squatted beside her and crossed his arms. Lin Hongyuan vomited a mouthful of blood. Apparently, she was not as energetic as before. She said dejectedly, If you go back on your words and know what you want to know, you will still kill me in the end. So what? Su Fengnian's eyes were clear. He shook his head and said, You can rest assured. I have a message for you to tell your benefactor, Mr. Naylan. Whether it's Zhao Weiping or that sneaky Yang Mao Yang, none of them are qualified. Lin Hongyuan steadied her breath and sneered. To understand the mystery of finger mystery, is it as easy as reciting a few lines of poetry? Young Master Su, could it be that you're a rare genius like Wang Xianji? Su Fengnian held his belly and laughed. Lin Hongyuan was confused. Su Fengnian pointed at Lin Hongyuan and said shamelessly, I thought I was already a jinx. I didn't expect you to be better than me. You are right. Lin Hongyuan lamented. He really wanted to break this bastard's 3 legs with one punch. Su Fengnian restrained his smile and said, Seriously, you should first talk about the meaning of the mysterious finger skill hidden in the Dragon Palace. If it's not useful to just talk about it, I don't mind being your practice body. You can wait for a chance to take revenge openly. Lin Hongyuan hesitated for a moment, and it was obvious that he was struggling with himself. Su Fengnian mocked. Lin Hongyuan, do you know that it's because you know too much about mechanism algebra that it's easy for you to be blinded by a single leaf? Women don't have courage and only know how to play petty tricks. They can't achieve great things. Extreme wisdom is bound to be hurt. This wisdom is small wisdom and not the wisdom of the root. Truly smart people will pretend to be stupid and be willing to suffer losses. If it was that woman from Mount Hui, she would have already done business with me based on her intuition. She is the one with the root of wisdom. You're too petty. I always think that a woman's intuition is very similar to the foresight of the root of finger mystery. Lin Hongyuan didn't disappoint Su Fengnian. She went straight to the point and asked indifferently, Have you ever personally copied the tablet? Su Fengnian shook his head. Lin Hongyuan frowned. After her eyebrows relaxed, she said, The Dragon Palace saved a Taoist great spiritual master 300 years ago and passed on a unique mystery finger mystery to that generation's patriarch. It was similar to a copy. Su Fengnian was originally concentrating. Suddenly he smiled and said, Change your clothes first. Lin Hongyuan didn't refuse. She stood up and changed her clothes. A woman's love for beauty had nothing to do with martial strength. The Dragon Palace amassed countless wealth. If she wanted jewelry, Lin Hongyuan could wear it so that people would only see the jewelry and not her. The Dragon Palace also hid a few sets of the phoenix coronet and robe that the Empress of Southern Tang didn't have time to take from the weaving bureau. Lin Hongyuan had just changed into a relatively simple and elegant dress when the curly-bearded swordsman Zhao Weiping respectfully reported at the door, Master Yuqi is here. Chapter 830. Lin Hongyuan did not go out immediately. Instead, she went to inform Su Fengnian. He asked Lin Hongyuan to do her business first while he leaned on the railing of the corridor outside the inner hall. Yuqi Liangfu, the owner of the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, was as busy as a bamboo dragonfly. The sudden arrival of Zhao Ningxin from the Taoist master residence of Dragon Tiger Mountain brought light to the villa. Even Wu Shizhen from the Qingyang Palace and Qiu Mian from the Butterfly Sword Sect became the icing on the cake. It did not mean that Zhao Ningxin, who was famous in the Liang Palace, was more important than Xianxia from the cottage. It was just that the latter was expected, so it was not as surprising as the former. Yuqi Liangfu had personally met more than 30 martial arts giants in the past 2 days. Most of them were in their prime, and there were also many old people. Among the younger generation, Li Yibai from the Dongyue sword pool was like a blunt sword that had not been sharpened yet. He was very easy to get along with. Li Huali from the Yanbao castle was so arrogant that he did not even take the owner of the villa seriously. Only the young Taoist master Zhao Ningxian, who was wearing a Taoist robe from Dragon Tiger Mountain, hemp shoes, and a bamboo flute around his waist, always stared at the eyes of others when he talked with them. He was so focused that others felt that he was chatting with them. It was not a boring greeting at all, but more like a reunion after a long separation. This young Taoist with warm and sincere eyes made people respect him. Yuqi Liangfu's self-esteem had been hurt a bit by that young man Li Huali, and it happened to be compensated by Zhao Ningxian. Comparing the goods to the goods, the manor lord, who was in the prime of his life, had a better impression of Zhao Ningxian. After he personally brought Zhao Ningxian to his residence, they talked so happily that he almost did not want to leave the house. If it was not for the chief steward who kept winking and reminding him that the great Bodhisattva from the Dragon Palace was still standing in the small courtyard by the lake, Yuqi Liangfu really wanted to have a long talk with Zhao Ningxian. When it came to cultivation, Zhao Ningxian's every word was like a gem. Yuqi Liangfu decided to take this opportunity to be on good terms with Dragon Tiger Mountain. There were a few precious Taoist scriptures in the library of the villa that were beneficial to him. Because the person who came from the Dragon Palace to visit the Quick Snow Villa was only an imperial censor, who was not a top-notch figure in the strict hierarchy of the Dragon Palace, Yuqi Liangfu was not willing to open the E-gate to welcome him. However, he could deliberately neglect the imperial censor, but he could not really ignore the Dragon Palace. The matter of face was mutual. The imperial censor did not make an excessive request to open the E-gate, which was giving face to the Quick Snow Villa. Yuqi Liangfu hurriedly came in person, which was giving face to the Dragon Palace. Yuqi Liangfu waited for a moment in the courtyard and saw a young woman with average looks cross the threshold. She greeted him with a smile. Lin Hongyuan from the Dragon Palace greets Master Yuqi. Yuqi Liangfu, who heard that the imperial censor came to the villa, was stunned for a moment. He quickly came back to his senses and stepped forward. His smile was even wider. He cupped his fists and said, "I did not expect young Palace Mistress Lin to come in person. The Quick Snow Villa is guilty of not welcoming you." Lin Hongyuan walked down the steps and stepped on the steps with Yuqi Liangfu. She said softly, "Niece knows that Uncle Yuqi must be very busy today, so I acted on my own initiative and did not tell the truth, so as to avoid Uncle Yuqi making unnecessary moves for niece's sake." Yuqi Liangfu's heart was very warm when he heard his niece's words. Not to mention that when the two crossed the threshold, young Palace Mistress Lin intentionally or unintentionally lagged behind by half a step. The host and guest were clearly distinguished. Yuqi Liangfu, who was dressed simply, laughed heartily and said, "If everyone was like you, Uncle would be relaxed. Unlike now, I wish I could break into two halves and use them. Take the Quadun Mountain, which claims to be the #1 sect in the southern wilderness, for example, a young man with the surname you came. Uncle has never heard of him. Not only does he want the villa to open the E-gate for him, but he also has to vacate the villa's Spring God restaurant for him. How ridiculous! To let such an ignorant child participate in this once-in-a-century grand event on behalf of the sect. Quadun Mountain has really entrusted the wrong person." Lin Hongyuan smiled but did not speak. Quadun Mountain was indeed a well-deserved sect in Lingnan. Moreover, it had been fighting openly and secretly with the Dragon Palace for a full 200 years. Quadun Mountain occupied an ancient temple on the border of the southern Tang Empire's Lin Hai. When the southern Tang Emperor ascended the throne to pray for rain, stop plague, and even ask for heirs and other important matters of state, he would send important ministers or local dignitaries to worship the sea god in the temple. Every time, he would set up a monument to record the event. So far, there were 29 Tang monuments. After Liang unified the spring and autumn period, because Bailiang dominated the northwest gateway, there were only two options for demoted officials. The officials were either sent to Liao and Lingnan, with the latter being the majority. The imperial court obviously trusted the Prince of Yan, Zhao Bing, more than the Prince of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui. Most of these demoted officials were from the local area. Quadun Mountain's literary atmosphere was quite strong. The two often sang poems together, adding a lot of luster to Quadun Mountain. If the Dragon Palace was Nailan Yusi's concubine maid, then Quadun Mountain was Nailan Yusi's fisherman. The two were just jealous of each other these years. Yuqi Liangfu's posture was nothing more than a common technique of suppressing and raising one's hand. However, he was adept in the ways of the world. In the end, He still needed to let others know that it was not too straightforward. Otherwise, if he blindly kept it hidden, others would not know whether he was good or bad. What would that be? Lin Hongyuan did not agree. She deliberately stepped on Quadun Mountain a few times. This would only make Yuqi Liangfu, the old fox, look down on the dragon palace behind her. The two sat on the yellow rosewood armchair. Yuqi Liangfu put his hands on the smooth armrest, while Lin Hongyuan sat upright and still. Her back did not touch the back of the chair at all, showing the etiquette of a junior. In the eyes of Yuqi Liangfu, the middle-aged man who sat on the first armchair in the quick snow mountain villa quietly withdrew his hands from the armrest and asked gently, "Niece, are you used to living here? The spring god lake is not like the dragon palace. In winter, it is always cold to the bone. Now it is snowing heavily. In the villa, there is an elegant and quiet courtyard paved with earth dragons. It is my daughter's boudoir. If you don't mind, you can move there to rest. Uncle's daughter has been fascinated by the dragon palace for a long time. She always complains to me that she was born in the wrong body. She should be a fairy in the dragon palace." Lin Hongyuan smiled and said, "If Sister Yuqi goes to the dragon palace, I will definitely give way." Yuqi Liangfu laughed and waved his hand. "Her half-baked swordsmanship is just a frog at the bottom of the well. I hope she can quickly find a good family to marry." Lin Hongyuan's eyes narrowed into crescents. "Sister Yuqi will not worry about marriage? In my opinion, she will definitely bring home a son-in-law of level 1 realm for uncle in the future." Yuqi Liangfu chuckled and said, "Thank you for your auspicious words." Immediately, a melancholy expression appeared on the quick snow mountain villa's master's face. "This damned girl. Uncle gets a headache every time she talks about it. I don't know where she heard some absurd rumors, but she is dead set on that Bailiang heir whom she has never met before. She says that he is the most heroic man in the world. When she talks about His Royal Highness, she is so familiar with it that it is as if she is possessed. Half of Uncle's white hair is because of her. Niece, in Uncle's opinion, although your sister Yuchuan is older than you by a few years, she is still thousands of miles away from you. Uncle still wants you to move there and persuade her on Uncle's behalf. When I try to reason with her, it goes in one ear and out the other. It is useless. If you talk to her, she will definitely be willing to listen. If she can really come out of a dead end, Uncle will personally take her to the Dragon Palace to visit and thank them in person." Lin Hongyuan's eyes flashed with an undetectable oddness, but he quickly said, "Then I'll stay at Big Sister Yuchi's place alone. As long as Big Sister Yuchi doesn't drive me away, I'll shamelessly stay here. Uncle will casually arrange a remote courtyard for these servants. Uncle, you don't have to be polite to your niece." Yuqi Liangfu laughed happily and said loudly, "It is hard to say about others, but there is absolutely no reason for you to feel wronged. You can continue to live in this courtyard without worry. Although the Quick Snow Mountain Villa is not comparable to the Dragon Palace, it is not so shabby that a courtyard is not presentable. Uncle will leave the words here today. In the future, this courtyard will be left to you. You can come and play at any time. When you are not living here, you are not allowed to enter the courtyard except for letting the maids clean it diligently. Come, 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 Uncle will take you to your sister Yuchi." Lin Hongyuan stood up and shook her head. "Uncle, you go ahead with your work. I still have some scattered things to pack. I will ask the way to Sister Yuchi and leisurely enjoy the scenery along the way." Yuqi Liangfu stood up and thought for a moment before nodding. "That is also fine. I will first send someone to inform that girl. Uncle is sure that you two will hit it off at first sight." Lin Hongyuan jokingly said, "Uncle, you should hurry up with your work. Your niece still has to worry about how to give Sister Yuchi a meeting gift that will not be degrading." Yuqi Liangfu politely said a few words, his face full of undisguised pleasure. He quickly walked out of the courtyard with the chief steward who had been silent all this time. After walking for more than 100 feet, Yuqi Liangfu looked back at the courtyard and sighed. If Yuchuan had half of Lin Hongyuan's shrewdness, I, as her father, would not have to worry. The old steward, who was close to 70 years old, softly comforted. "Manor Lord, eldest Miss Pure Heart is precious. As the old saying goes, those who cherish fortune will have it." Yuqi Liangfu laughed and scolded. "What ancient saying? Most likely, it was made up by you again. That girl Yuchuan was right. We should publish a cautionary tale for you. It won't be much worse than the first snow." The old steward looked as if he had drunk a pot of wine. He stroked his beard and smiled. You must understand and not deceive yourself. Manor Lord, I am just a half-baked person. Don't make a fool of yourself. Jianghu stretched out his hand and pointed at the old steward. You. Chapter 831. The two rushed to the next courtyard, where lived a sect that was one of the top 3 in Jianghu when it came to poisons. It didn't matter if they were friends or not, but they definitely couldn't be enemies. Jianghu had to brace himself to deal with them. He heard that the eccentric old man liked men. For this reason, the Quick Snow Manor hired 2 handsome young men from a brothel in Xianxia City to live in the courtyard. They were discreetly hidden among the maids, just in case. Jianghu was deeply moved as he walked. This time, in order to win the election of the Wulin Alliance leader, Xianxia had paid a great price not only in the Spring Invitation Cottage but also in the Dongyue Sword Pool. Just the unremarkable ingredients alone cost more than 3,000 taels of silver a day, not to mention the extravagant expenses of renting expensive young men from the brothel. In the courtyard, Lin Hongyuan walked to the outer corridor and saw Su Fengnian sitting against the wall outside, fiddling with something with his head lowered. She smiled and said, "Have you heard? That Miss Yuchi is very stubborn about you, young master." Su Fengnian raised his head, revealing an unfamiliar face. He wore a root-shaped face that hadn't been used much since his Beimang returned. He smiled and said, "This Miss Yuchi's taste is very good, unparalleled in the world." The corner of Lin Hongyuan's mouth twitched. Su Fengnian stood up and smiled. "Go get me an ordinary mink hat. Let's make another bet." Lin Hongyuan asked, "What bet?" Su Fengnian crossed his fingers and stretched them to the top of his head. He lazily shook his head. "Let's bet on whether or not I can kill Xianxia tonight. If I can kill her, you'll have to say another type of finger art outside of steel rubbing. If you can't kill her and get killed instead, you have no loss." Lin Hongyuan sneered. "You don't get up early if there are no benefits. What does it have to do with me whether you kill Xianxia or not?" Su Fengnian smiled and looked at Lin Hongyuan. The latter giggled. "If you can kill Xianxia, Li Huili, and Li Yibai in succession, I'll bet with you." Su Fengnian clicked his tongue. "You finally learned to be smart. But first, I won't kill Li Yibai. Do you have any enemies? Let's exchange." Lin Hongyuan said without hesitation. "No problem. Let's kill Choduan Mountain's Yushi man. I can give you the mink hat and the courtyard where they live in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa before nightfall." Su Fengnian glanced at Lin Hongyuan, who spoke in a straightforward manner, and clicked his tongue in wonder. "You've hidden your strength well. You've been plotting against that Yushi for a long time. This time, not only did you, the young palace master, hide your head and show your tail, but you also brought along Yang Maoyang, who did not hesitate to sneak into the team carrying the palanquin. Just to target Quadan Mountain? If you use me to kill someone, your hands won't be stained with blood. When the time comes, Yuchi Nyochuan will testify for you, and the Dragon Palace will be cleared of any wrongdoing." Lin Hongyuan smiled foolishly and didn't speak. Su Fengnian looked at the mist in the distance of the Spring God Lake. Lin Hongyuan's eyesight was good. He followed the line of sight and didn't see anything. A moment later, a woman's voice was heard. "Is the southern border Dragon Palace living here? Answer me. If not, I won't go ashore." Lin Hongyuan came near the railing and saw a young woman with a pretty face and a particularly enchanting figure pulling a boat over alone. She was wearing a high-quality fox fur coat, but it was inevitably a little gray and old because of the years. Lin Hongyuan was surprised that such a woman appeared in such a new way. He asked calmly, "Are you Yu Quan?" The woman nodded. "Then you are?" Lin Hongyuan sensed that Su Fengnian had long disappeared, so he had a deeper understanding of him. Facing the eldest miss of Quick Snow Manor, Yuchi Nyochuan, he smiled and said, "I am Lin Hongyuan of Dragon Palace. Greetings to Sister Yuchi." Yuchi Yu Quan put down her bamboo pole and quickly jumped onto the outer corridor. "Are you Fairy Lin, the young palace master?" Normally, Lin Hongyuan wouldn't care. But after hearing about the young devil's harsh sarcasm towards the heroines of Jianghu, he felt slightly uncomfortable. Yuchi Yu Quan didn't care about their first meeting. She warmly grabbed Lin Hongyuan's hands and asked with a face full of surprise, "Fairy Lin, is your dragon palace really built at the bottom of the sea like the rumors say?" Lin Hongyuan thought to himself, being admired by such a silly girl doesn't seem to be something to be proud of. Yuchi Yu Quan's face suddenly turned cold. she said fiercely. What are you hiding for? A big man, come out. Hey, the one in the room, I'm talking about you. You were in the outer corridor just now, but now you're less than 30 feet away from me. Don't think that I don't know where you are just because you're behind a wall. Lin Hongyuan was shocked to the extreme. Could it be that this girl was the same kind of ruthless person as the one surnamed Su, and both liked to play the fool? Inside the room, Su Fengnian was also quite shocked. After hesitating for a moment, he calmly walked out of the room. Lin Hongyuan, who was standing side by side with Yuqi Yuquan, quietly raised his hand and made a swift and fierce gesture, silently asking Su Fengnian if he should kill this hidden danger. Su Fengnian turned a blind eye to it. He was in the middle of preparing his words, but he didn't expect that the girl would stare at Su Fengnian's white hair. Then with a jump, she rushed in front of Su Fengnian. Almost nose to nose, she said in a shocking tone, "Haha, I knew it was you, Su Fengnian Bailiang." Su Fengnian didn't wait for her to say the words His Royal Highness. He directly knocked out this girl with a karate chop. He thought that there would be more twists and turns, but he didn't expect that this karate chop, which was more probing than murderous, would go so smoothly. She rolled her eyes without any resistance, and then her delicate body fell limply into his arms. That's it? Lin Hongyuan really couldn't stand this kind of boring turn of events. He originally thought that this Yuchi sister and the one surnamed Su would have a good show of a snipe and a clam fighting for several hundred rounds until the sky turned dark. It would be good if they fought from the outer corridor to the surface of the lake. Lin Hongyuan was glanced at by Su Fengnian and felt somewhat guilty. He asked in a small voice, "Then should I still go to Yuqi Yuquan's house? If I can't find her at the Snow Mountain Villa, it won't be easy to wrap things up." Su Fengnian said without hesitation, "Drink. Go find a jug. First, fill your mouth with the smell of alcohol, pretend to be drunk, and then pour a few mouthfuls into her mouth. If anyone asks on the way, just say that you regret not having met earlier, and help her back to the house. The 2 matters of the mink hat and the 3 people's residence, do as instructed. 1 night is enough." Lin Hongyuan was silent. Su Fengnian, who was still holding Yuqi Yuquan, frowned and said, "Are you deaf?" Lin Hongyuan sighed. "No wonder Mr. Naylan praised you so much in private." Su Fengnian carried Yuqi Yuquan on his shoulder, turned around and walked back into the house. He sneered. "Do you think that was a compliment? A truly intelligent person won't be valued by the opponent before they exchange blows." Lin Hongyuan followed behind him, laughing to himself. If there was still a chance to make him into a puppet, he wouldn't have given him a mute drug. After all, listening to him speak, whether it was reasonable or not, was quite interesting and could relieve boredom. Su Fengnian casually threw the fainted Yuqi Yuquan on the armchair and began to close his eyes to concentrate. In less than an hour, dusk was approaching. Zhao Weiping walked into the house and handed Lin Hongyuan a mink hat and a handkerchief. Lin Hongyuan spread it out and carefully looked at it, then hid it in his sleeve. He walked to the corner of the hall and took out a wintersuite that needed to be changed every day from a vase. It was waxy yellow in color and had been broken off not long ago. It was still tender and beautiful, with some moisture. Lin Hongyuan carried the wintersuite branch and squatted at Su Fengnian's feet. While describing the terrain of the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, he divided the ground vertically and horizontally. Spring Invitation Cottages Xianxia and Yanbao's Li Huoli's courtyard were not too far apart because of their status. The key point was that their backing was on the same level, so they were relatively close to each other. Only Yu Shiman's courtyard was separated by half a li in a straight line. Including the detours, it was estimated to be 1 li. Don't look at the difference of half a li. It might contain huge variables. While pointing the way, Lin Hongyuan did not speak much nonsense. He knew that this demon was not stupid enough to fly over the eaves of the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. Su Fengnian, who was spinning the mink hat with his fingers, closed his eyes and reviewed the plan. After opening his eyes, he nodded and said, "It's done." Lin Hongyuan nervously asked, "Can you tell me the general plan?" Su Fengnian calmly said, "Just do it as simple as you can." Even if he said it, it would be useless. Lin Hongyuan really did not have the courage to get to the bottom of it. Yuqi Nyochuan let out a series of small and broken groans of pain. In the ears of an old hand in flowers, it might have a special charm. Su Fengnian originally wanted to knock her out with a finger and let her sleep until dawn. After thinking about it, he gave up and gently patted her face. Yuchi Nyochuan seemed to have used up a lot of strength to open her eyes. Her face was blank and absent-minded. Su Fengnian and her sat in an armchair facing each other. He calmly said, "You will answer whatever I ask." She unconsciously nodded her head. Su Fengnian asked, "How did you know of my existence?" Yuchi Nyochuan finally came back to her senses a little, but she still felt that her entire body lacked strength. She wanted to speak to him a little louder, but she did not have the strength. She wrinkled her nose and said with hidden bitterness in her eyes, "I smelled it. My nose has been very sensitive since I was young. When I was young, my mother often laughed at me for being like a puppy. Why did you hit me the moment you saw me? Even if you are Su." Su Fengnian's expression was cold as he directly flicked his finger on her forehead. The pain caused her entire body to emit cold air. She did her best to wrap her arms around her shoulders, on the verge of tears. Su Fengnian stared at her limpid eyes and continued to ask, "Why are you so sure that I am Su Fengnian?" Chapter 832. She tried to squeeze out a smile. Seeing that he was about to raise his hand to teach her a lesson, she hurriedly said in a panic, "The first time I heard of you was when I went to burn incense at Mount Longhu 2 years ago. There was a pilgrim who often went to the mountain who talked about the sword you borrowed on the snowy plains, and you said something about returning that." Lin Hongyuan knew that Yuchi Juchuan was thin-skinned and did not have the nerve to say the words "returning my ass." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Su Fengnian's expressionless face. Yuchi Juchuan, who did not dare meet his gaze, carefully said, "Our snowy mountain villa has some land on the other side of the Guangling River. No one believed that you and the Guangling king had a falling out, but I knew that it was true. Otherwise, you wouldn't have fought. It was a steward who saw it with his own eyes on the 18th of the 8th month. He patted his chest and said that it was definitely not a lie. Later on, some storytellers who had stayed in Bailiang began to tell stories of you going to the white horse race in Beimang. At the beginning of the year, I would go and listen to them every few days. They said that not only did you kill the great king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, you also killed the insufferably arrogant mountain master of Mount Tibing in one move. Only then did I know that there was someone with the surname Diwu in the world. There were also storytellers who said that you had unsheathed your sword and lent it to the peach blossom sword god, Dong Tai. Also, you saw that after sword god Deng fought Tuoba to a draw, he personally entered the fray and fought with the second in the world, Tuoba, for 3 days and 3 nights. He was beaten to the point that he had no choice but to promise that he would never dare to go south again." Lin Hongyuan suppressed his laughter. Su Fengnian listened to this extravagant nonsense. His skin was so thick that he did not retort. He only smiled with narrowed eyes and nodded. The more Yuchi Juchuan spoke, the more spirited he became. His eyes were shining, and his hands were clasped in front of his chest as he stared in a daze at the hero with the surname Heaven in his heart. "Later on, I heard that the vassal king entered the capital. In Great Peace City, you overturned the entire Central Imperial Road and killed several hundred Imperial College students who blocked your path. Also, on the day of the ceremony, if you hadn't stopped Chao Chongqing alone, he would have killed His Majesty the Emperor and all the civil and military officials. Great General Gu, Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War, Lu Xianxiang, they wouldn't have been of any use." Even Su Fengnian, whose face was as thick as a city wall, couldn't take it any more. Lin Hongyuan had already turned his head away. He really couldn't bear to look, pretending to fiddle with the pitiful wintersuite. Su Fengnian had to interrupt the woman and asked curiously, "You believe it?" Yuchi Reader's eyes widened as he asked in return, "Could it not be?" Su Fengnian's face was heavy. He nodded slowly and reluctantly admitted, "It's true." Crouching to the side, Lin Hongyuan laughed out loud. As a result, Su Fengnian kicked him in the butt, causing him to fall flat on his face. Su Fengnian ignored Lin Hongyuan's angry glare. He smiled slightly at this girl who was most likely really stupid. "The matter of me being Su Fengnian, you can't even tell your father." Yuchi Reader nodded vigorously. "I know. You definitely have something important to do. Otherwise, you wouldn't wear this face." She suddenly fell silent. So this girl wasn't so stupid that she couldn't be saved. Su Fengnian explained with a smile, "I have no enmity with your quick snow manner. I won't do anything to your father." Yuchi Reader, who had finally had a flash of inspiration, reverted to her old ways and began to act stupid again. "Really?" Su Fengnian nodded. "Really?" This stupid girl had probably believed him again. There were only 3 people in the room. The 2 foreign men and women who had hooked up with each other were experienced in the ways of the world. Each one was more cunning than the other. Only this girl who had rowed the boat seemed to end up being played in the palm of his hand no matter how hard she tried. But for some reason, Lin Hongyuan, who had struggled in a vat of dye since childhood, looked at this girl who had a pure smile on her face with some envy. Su Fengnian did not speak. Yuchi Reader felt particularly ill at ease. Her fingers fiercely pinched the corner of her sleeves under her old fur coat. This made her somewhat regret not changing into a new fur coat today. Su Fengnian finally asked, "Do you know exactly when to light the lanterns at night?" Yuchi Reader's mind had wandered thousands of miles. Upon hearing this, she jumped in fright and hurriedly sat up straight. Biting her lips, she said, "When the sky is clear, it's probably when the afterglow has dispersed. When it's snowing, I didn't pay attention in the past, so I can't say." Su Fengnian grunted and said with a smile, "Go to the courtyard and find a jug of wine." Relieved, she went to find the wine. Lin Hongyuan seemed to suddenly remember something and said in a low voice, "Zhao Ningxin later entered the Quick Snow Mountain Villa." Yuchi Liangfu probably didn't expect that, so the courtyard arranged for her was a little far from Xianxia, Li Huili, and the others. Su Fengnian said with a ruminating smile, "You finally remember? I thought you wouldn't remember until I was discharged from the hospital. After I came back, no young palace master of the Dragon Palace came to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, and no Lin Hongyuan left the Quick Snow Mountain Villa." Lin Hongyuan looked as if he had been struck by lightning, his face pale. Yuchi Reader was naturally familiar with her own home, so she quickly brought over a jug of wine. Su Fengnian didn't accompany her to drink. He took a yellow pearwood chair out of the house and sat on the porch to enjoy the lake scenery alone until dusk fell. It was unknown what Lin Hongyuan said in the house, but Yuchi Reader didn't have the courage to go to the porch. Su Fengnian stood up, took a deep breath, and heavily tapped the ground with the tip of his foot. The lake water outside the railing violently swayed and gradually calmed down. Dusk gradually deepened, and the large red lanterns in the villa lit up in picturesque disorder. It became more festive and lively. In a quiet courtyard, the lanterns were brightly lit. The red candles in the hall were as thick as a baby's arm, but there was no one in sight. He stood in the study and pulled out a short halberd from his halberd pouch, gently twirling it in his hand. He had led 4 elite retainers south from Jianghu and encountered 2 heavy snowfalls. During the first snowfall, they were still in Jianghu. The heavy snowfall was majestic and imposing. During the second snowfall, they were in Jiangnan, delicate and powerless. This made him, who had lived on the dangerous border since childhood, have an even worse impression of Jiangnan. Along the way, he had seen the elegant conduct of many scholars. In his eyes, these vermin who only knew how to chew words were as weak as the snow at that time. They couldn't withstand his short halberd toss and kill. On his journey south this time, naturally there would be people who would constantly spread rumors, causing him to suddenly go from being a military officer of a border town to having the potential to become the Wulin Alliance leader. Even he himself thought it was absurd and laughable, but he remembered his father's advice and had no choice but to do things step by step. After arriving at the villa, wave after wave of visitors came to curry favor with those in power. He barely managed to chat with 3 groups of Jianghu people he had never heard of before, but he couldn't stand the disturbance and simply closed the door and declined the visitors. He walked to the open window. Although there were only 4 retainers of the Li family in Jianghu resting in this courtyard, there were no less than 10 Zhao gathered in the dark corner. He laughed self-deprecatingly and tapped his shoulder with the short halberd. "Can I, Li Huili, be considered to have received the will of heaven this time?" The ground trembled slightly. Li Huili didn't think too deeply. The wall suddenly cracked open. When he turned around with the halberd, a palm pressed against his forehead and his entire body was instantly lifted off the ground. He was pushed against the wall at the side of the hall, his head hitting the wall earlier than his back. One of the Zhao broke through the window and was stunned. Li Huili, the young fort master of Wild Goose Castle, was leaning against the wall. He died with his eyes wide open, leaving a pool of scarlet blood on the wall. There was a big hole in the wall where Li Huili's body was facing. More than 10 Zhao gathered and looked at each other. 3 courtyards away, the old Confucian who came by the ox cart was flipping through a book with a lamp. He suddenly raised his head and made a gesture with both hands. An ancient sword on the desk next to him flew through the wall and into his hands. Xianxia of the Spring Invitation Cottage had immersed himself in the art of swordsmanship for most of his life, but he rarely used a sword. In his life, there were only a few people who had tested his sword, and the Sword Emperor of West Shu was one of them. This sword was a gift for his disciple. Xianxia originally planned to borrow it from a disciple who was in seclusion after the Snow Mountain Villa incident was over. He wanted to fight with the leader of the Sword Pool of East Yu, and let the world know that the Spring Invitation Cottage was not only the leader of the martial arts world, but also that his sword alone was enough to make the cottage and the Sword Pool of Swordgrave in Jianghu. The sword broke through the wall, and the daring assassin also broke through the wall and arrived. So what if you have the physique of a Vajra realm warrior? Xianxia, who was still sitting on the chair, snorted coldly. He shook his wrist and the sword aura was like a painting of mountains and rivers. The evil venomous beast actually resisted the sword aura, ignoring the sword tip that was pointed at its heart and still charging forward. Xianxia was furious. The sword aura at the tip of the sword suddenly surged. The unknown assassin shocked the old man again. His heart was against the tip of the ancient sword. Not only did it not pierce through the skin and heart, but it also pressed the long sword into an arc like a fish's back. The older the wiser. Xianxia's sword collapsed and withdrew the sword aura. He and the chair slid toward the wall, breaking it into pieces. The old man had one hand on the wall and the other holding the sword. Instead of retreating, he rushed toward the strange young man in the mink hat. The young assassin, who was fighting with his life for some reason, pushed forward. Xianxia sneered in his heart and used all the sword aura in his life to his heart's content. The mink hat assassin let the sword go through his palm and leaned forward, forming a strange posture as if he was carrying a sword on his shoulder. He hit Xianxia's head with his head. There was a bang. Xianxia's head hit the wall. But at the same time, he swept his sword and was about to cut off the young man's head. When the sword tip was still an inch away from the man's neck, the sharp sword aura had already arrived and cut a bloody groove on his neck. A man in a vermilion robe appeared beside the two. His forearms held the sword tip, not letting Xianxia's sword move at all. The mink hat assassin cut down diagonally with his palm. He quickly retreated. The sword slipped out of the hand that had a hole in it. The assassin flew out of the big hole in the wall. The cold wind rushed into the room and the lamp on the table flickered. The lamp went out. Only a corpse that had been cut in half was left. Chapter 833. The light in the hall was splendid, illuminating the glazed floor in a dazzling and colorful light. Lin Hongyuan was situated within it, as if it was the pure glazed world recorded in Taoist scriptures. She wondered if she should do the same after returning to the Dragon Palace. Yuqi drank absent-mindedly, the corner of his eyes constantly glancing at the outer corridor. The sky was dusky, and there were no lanterns hanging there. She hesitated whether or not she should find an excuse to see him. When she raised her wine cup, she sniffed it and hurriedly turned to look at the outer corridor, wanting to stand up. Lin Hongyuan gently tugged on Yuqi sleeve. The latter's face was full of anxiety, saying that he had smelled blood. After hearing this, Lin Hongyuan's thoughts turned rapidly. With that young devil's unfathomable skill and cultivation, even if there were crouching tigers and hidden dragons in Snow Manor, the number of experts that could injure him could be counted on one hand. Xianxia counted as one, and Li Yibai counted as half. However, other than the two tremors in the outer corridor, there was no other movement. Could it be that someone was hiding at the bottom of the lake, treacherously ambushing Su Fengnian, and then retreating after succeeding? Otherwise, it was impossible for that guy to be idle and use his flying sword to kill the fish in the lake, bringing out the smell of blood. Lin Hongyuan's curiosity was also piqued. After hesitating for a moment, she gave Yuqi a look, and they both stood up and walked towards the outer corridor. The night gradually darkened, as if an immortal in the heavens had thrown a black cloth to the earth. Fortunately, the hall and the outer corridor were connected, and the candlelight and glazed light flowed out like fertile water. The scene in the outer corridor swayed with the light of the candlelight blowing over the lake's surface. Su Fengnian could vaguely be seen sitting upright on a chair, gently twisting his wrist. Lin Hongyuan's eyes were sharp, and she saw that there was a piece of cotton cloth tied around his wrist. Yuqi anxiously asked, "How did you get injured?" Su Fengnian played it down. "The ground was slippery, and I accidentally fell." Yuqi cried out in surprise, his face full of guilt. Lin Hongyuan sighed inwardly. If this elder sister was thrown into the Jianghu, she would be eaten by those wolves, tigers, and leopards in human skin. Su Fengnian stood up and said with a smile, "Let me send you off. There are all kinds of people in the manor right now, and I'm worried about the two of you." Fairy Lin had previously told her that the founder of the Dragon Palace said that one may know a person's face but not his heart. Although most of the people who entered the Quickie Snow Mountain Villa were righteous people, they might be hypocrites, not to mention those Jianghu people who were both righteous and evil. "Let's take a stroll around the manor and enjoy the scenery while we're at it." "All right, I need to disguise myself first. Please wait for a moment." Lin Hongyuan sneered in his heart. A hypocrite? Su Fengnian turned around and covered his face with a root-like mask. After turning his head, he had already turned into an elegant scholar. Yuchi Chaochuan's mouth was slightly agape. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard from inside the house. When Manor Lord Yuchi Liangfu saw that his daughter was safe and sound, he was obviously relieved of a heavy burden. However, he still pretended to be indifferent and said with a smile, "If father's guess is correct, they came here by boat?" "Chaoquan, how can you greet a distinguished guest like this? Only young Palace Lord Lin is experienced and knowledgeable and won't lower himself to your level." Yuchi Chaoquan smiled and ran to Yuchi Liangfu's side, affectionately calling him father. Yuchi Liangfu lowered his head and glared at her. Then he quickly raised his eyes and smiled at the young white-haired scholar. Even with a warm smile, the way he looked at his daughter was completely different. Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and bowed respectfully. "The Dragon Palace's Li harvesting official is honored to meet Manor Lord." Lin Hongyuan explained with a smile, "Zhu Jing is Mr. Nalin's favorite student. People outside of the Southern Tang sect may not be familiar with young Master Zhua. When he first entered the Dragon Palace, we intended to let him choose a position. However, young Master Zhua had a strange eye and chose a Li harvesting official who was not as good as the Imperial Censor official. He said that the saying of harvesting pearls was more pleasing to the scholars who aspired to win the Imperial examination. Sister Yuchi and I have been drinking for about an hour. Young Master Zhua was only focused on being our door god. Sister Yuchi still has more face." The iciness in Yuchi Liangfu's eyes melted and immediately turned a bit warmer. Indeed, the title of Mr. Nalin was too high and unreachable for the people of Liang. He was the #1 person in the Southern Tang Dao, not just in name but also in reality. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was Nalin Yusi rather than Zhao Bing, the Prince of Yanqi. Even under the eyes of Zhao Bing on the southern border, how many times had Mr. Nalin overstepped his authority? Otherwise, when the vassal kings entered the capital, Nalin Yusi would not have taken the carriage and the king of Yanqi would not have acted as the escort knight. If Zhu Jing was really Mr. Nalin's disciple, then Yuchi Liangfu valued him even more than Lin Hongyuan, the young Palace Lord Lin who was in an awkward position. Yuchi Liangfu cupped his fists and said softly, "There was an accident in the manor, but since young Master Zhua is by my daughter's side, Liangfu can rest easy. After dealing with the matters at hand, Liangfu will apologize to young Master Zhua and have a good drink." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "I don't dare to disobey." Yuchi Liangfu left the courtyard and shook his head to the old steward who was waiting at the door and said, "Yuchuan is fine. We met a young man named Zhu Jing." Lin Hongyuan said that he was Nalin Yusi's disciple. But even if the Dragon Palace made a move this time, it was only directed at Qiaodong Mountain. Moreover, the Dragon Palace absolutely did not have the strength to kill Li Huali and Xianxia. How could the Dragon Palace, which is located in a corner of Nanjiang, shake the power behind these two people? If it was really Mr. Nalin's shocking plan, even if it was really the Dragon Palace's doing, it was not something that the Quick Snow Manor could intervene in. We, the people of Jianghu who have no one to rely on in the imperial court, could easily be destroyed. Chapter 834. The old steward was deeply worried. "I really can't think of anyone with such skill and courage." Although Xianxia did not appear in the martial arts competition, she is still a top-notch master. The Spring Invitation Cottage is also connected to the new Minister of War. Li Huali's skills are probably average, but with the imperial court as a life-saving talisman, who would dare to make a move? I'm afraid that if the manor does not handle this properly, it will be hard to avoid the wrath of various powers. There will be many who will take advantage of the situation to fish in troubled waters and add insult to injury. Manor Lord must think of a way out. The King of Jing and has always wanted Quick Snow Mountain Villa to rely on the Wang family. Manor Lord, do you agree? Yuchi Liangfu's expression was complicated, and he was unable to decide what to do. He stopped and looked at a large red lantern hanging on a tree branch. There was no joy in it at all. He heavily exhaled and helplessly said, "It's like doing business. I originally wanted to use this time's Wulin Alliance leader election to bring prestige to the manor. When the time comes, we can find a buyer ourselves. The highest bidder gets it. The king of Jianghu urgently wants to buy it, and we don't have to worry about the next buyer. We can follow our own temperament and not sell it. Now that we are in trouble, and we turn to the Jianghu Palace, I'm afraid Quick Snow Mountain Villa will have to be sold at a low price. If we buy and sell it to everyone's satisfaction, then it's fine. But now I'm afraid that even if we sell it to the Jianghu Palace, that young vassal king will remember that Quick Snow Mountain Villa was not tactful in the past and make things difficult for the manor. I know that this vassal king has a master behind the scenes, and his governance is clear, and he is well known. He is not inferior to the old vassal king in any way. Judging from his words and actions, he doesn't seem to have a big heart. A person without foresight will have immediate worries. As the head of the manor, I'm afraid that when I pay respects to my ancestors in the future, I won't have the face to face them." The old steward softly comforted him. "Yenbao has already sent people to the king of Jing and to mobilize troops. I hope it will be settled in one fell swoop. Once the thousands of iron cavalry from Xiang and Fan arrive, as long as the assassin leaves a trace, it will be difficult for him to escape. I'm afraid that he will kill in 10 steps, and by now he has already escaped." A trusted steward of the manor hurriedly delivered a message. "Manor lord, we've only traveled less than 10 li from Yenbao when we were intercepted by Prince Jing and scouts. It turns out that Prince Jing and had already used the military tally to mobilize the Qingzhou Navy. The warships were lined up on the lake 20 li away. It was only because of the thick fog on the lake that no one noticed them. Furthermore, there were more than 4,000 light cavalry stationed at every intersection, along with dozens of scouts scattered all over the place. As soon as there's any movement, we can reel in the net." After Yuqi Liangfu recovered from his pleasant surprise, he bitterly smiled and said, "This Prince Jing and truly has divine foresight. So it turns out that Soar Snow Manor has become a fish pond. As long as the big fish takes the bait, it will be dragged to the shore. Think. Look. Maybe Xianxia and Li Yibai are the crown prince's students. They are only there to deceive the public and make it look better for the imperial court to meddle in the martial arts world. Manor lord, there is one thing I have to say. Fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. If Quick Snow Mountain Villa wants to turn from bad to good, distant water cannot quench the immediate thirst. We can only choose the Jing'an Palace as our neighbor. After all, he is the first king to inherit the throne after the spring and autumn period. He is quite favored in the capital." Yuqi Liangfu waved his hand to dismiss the steward. He hesitantly said, "Let me think about it." The old steward anxiously said, "Manor lord, time waits for no one." Anger appeared on Yuqi Liangfu's face. He spoke without thinking. "Do you really want Niuchuan to be the concubine of that young king who has always been in love with his mother? Yuqi Liangfu can't sell his daughter for glory and wealth." The old steward kept quiet out of fear. He sighed and said, "It was a bad plan. Although the villa was saved, it was indeed hard on the young miss." Yuqi Liangfu patted the old man's shoulder and said apologetically, "Old Lu, I know you are loyal and devoted to the manor, but I, Niuchuan, only have one daughter. She has the same stubborn temperament as her mother who died young. As her father, I have to make her happy. Marrying a poor boy who truly likes her is better than marrying into a family of generals and ministers where everything is out of her control. How many women can live happily as duckweed?" The old steward nodded. Yuqi Liangfu fiercely rubbed his cheeks and said in a low voice, "Wait a little longer." At the outer corridor, compared to Yuqi Liangfu and the old steward who were stuck in a quagmire, it was much more relaxed on the surface. Yuqi Niuchuan volunteered herself, saying that she could reach her residence by rowing a boat. However, when she approached the railing and knocked, she was immediately dumbfounded. At that time, she was in a hurry to get ashore and forgot to fasten the small boat with a black canopy. Probably because of the lake breeze, there was no trace of the small boat. This made Yuqi Niuchuan's face turn red. She didn't dare to look at Su Fengyan and Lin Hongyuan. At this moment, a black figure slowly passed through the fog and appeared in everyone's field of vision. A young and handsome Taoist stood at the bow of the boat with an exquisite bamboo flute tied to his waist. He had a somewhat ethereal and otherworldly charm. The orthodoxy of the world revere the ancestral court, Mount Longhu. The Taoists of the world naturally regarded the Mount Longhu's heavenly master as the most important. Although the young Taoist in front of them didn't dress like a noble from the heavenly master's residence, his bearing could make people forget him at a glance. Lin Hongyuan slightly narrowed her eyes in order to hide her schadenfreude. The main character had arrived. Moreover, this young Taoist who had a meteoric rise in the imperial court and a great reputation in the Jianghu didn't disappoint Lin Hongyuan. On the contrary, his words broke the heavenly mystery. This humble Taoist of Mount Longhu's Zhao Ningxian greets young palace head Lin and young Miss Yuqi. Also this young master, your left hand has been pierced by a sword in your sleeve. Would you allow this humble Taoist to make an unnecessary move and shamelessly gift you a bottle of the mountain's secret golden sore medicine? Su Fengnian didn't move at all. He stood by the railing with his hands in his sleeves. Zhao Ningxian smiled warmly. Other than returning the boat to young Miss Yuqi, this humble Taoist also has a gift in return. I remember that at that time on the great snowfield, there was someone who spoke malicious words and didn't return a sword owed. Su Fengnian's reply simply swayed Yuqi Nyochuan's mind. Of course, she didn't care about some Mount Longhu Taoist owing a sword on the great snowfield. This silly girl's but had always been unswervingly tilted towards the fellow beside her. She only heard him ask, "Are you courting death?" Chapter 835. Lin Hongyuan's eyesight was needless to say. No matter how much this woman wanted to watch a big show, he still hurriedly pulled Yuqi Yuquan out of the corridor and went straight to the latter's boudoir. Zhao Ningxian on the lake and Su Fengnian in the corridor stood facing each other silently. They seemed to be at ease, but they didn't know that the grudge between them started from their father's generation. Su Shao was at the end of Jianghu and almost pressed down Dragon Tiger's head. Su Fengnian stared at the young Taoist in front of him and sneered. His hands were crossed in front of his chest and his fingers were covered in red ropes. It was said that this little Taoist master had once blocked Dong Tai's sword. At first, people thought it was a boast from Dragon Tiger Mountain. Later, Zhao Ningxian blocked the mad monk of the west and stopped for several miles. Finally, no one doubted him and some even began to regard him as a Xian finger expert. Zhao Ningxian stood at the bow of the boat with a warm smile. I predicted that His Royal Highness would come to Snow Villa today to enjoy the snow. I predicted that he would go to Spring God Lake to see Wang Dongxiang and then Lu Feiqi. The only thing I didn't expect was that your highness would kill Li Huili from Yanbao and Xianxia from the cottage. Aren't you afraid that once it's leaked, you'll become the common enemy of Jianghu before you inherit the title of king? Su Fengnian took 2 steps closer to the railing. Li Huili has Zhao Gou's protection and the support of the imperial court. Xianxia's spring invitation cottage is also creating momentum for him. The position of Wulin Alliance's chief will be his. Why does he need Dragon Tiger Mountain to add flowers to the brocade? Now that I think about it, your Mount Longhu only knows how to do shady business like writing poems to prolong the emperor's life. It's rumored that you're the reincarnation of the founder of Dragon Tiger Mountain. Have you been enlightened? You probably haven't. Otherwise, Long Qi would have released the Lotus of Fortune long ago. With your Taoist master residence's character, you can't wait to dig the dead out of their coffins to inform them of such a good thing. You enjoy it alone and monopolize the good things. You enjoy it together. You only let people know of your good deeds. Anyway, you don't interfere with either. Zhao Ningxian shook his head and smiled. His Royal Highness has a deep prejudice against Dragon Tiger Mountain. Those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. Su Fengnian intertwined his 10 fingers only slightly separated by an inch. Zhao Ningxian said, "Wait a minute." Zhao Ningxian smiled and said, "This time I came to visit the Snow Mountain Villa, I didn't want to get involved in the matter of the Wulin Alliance leader. The turmoil of the Spring Invitation Cottage and Wild Goose Castle is not in my eyes, and I don't care." This time, he only wanted to see His Royal Highness. Since he had already seen him, he came in high spirits and returned in high spirits. The Great Snow Plateau owed a sword, but Longhu Mountain's return gift meant that Bailiang didn't have to pay it back. I only hope that Bailiang won't make things difficult for Longhu Mountain and will mind their own business. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "What? You actually predicted that before I return to Bailiang, I'll kill every Taoist who dares to take a single step out of Mount Longhu? You predicted that I'll offer a reward of 100 taels of gold for each Taoist master mansion person in Jianghu, and Bailiang will promise to shelter him from the wind and rain, so that your Taoist masters of Mount Longhu will be in danger? So you used the bloody case of Snow Mountain Villa to threaten everyone to take a step back and celebrate the new year peacefully? Zhao Ningxin's eyes were clear and calm. He said, "Your Highness is willing to guard the northwest for the people of the Central Plains. I also sincerely admire you. If I was a free cloud and a wild crane, I would definitely raise a big white bow. Unfortunately, I have to do things in my position. Since I was born with the surname Zhao, I have to do things that go against my pure heart. I hope your Highness can understand. To kill 1,000 of the enemy but to lose 800 of your own men, it won't benefit Mount Longhu or Beiliang." Back then, Mount Longhu didn't allow the first commandery princess to climb the mountain to burn incense. It was the Taoist Master Mansion's fault. That's why when sect leader Hong destroyed a total of 9 Lotus of Fate, the Taoist Master Mansion didn't say anything. Ancestor Zhao Xuansu came out of seclusion and went down the mountain. He intentionally made things difficult for your Highness outside the martial emperor city of the Eastern Sea. In the end, it was the cycle of karma and his body died. He painstakingly cultivated for a total of 140 years, but in the end, he still couldn't achieve immortality. An eye for an eye. Mount Longhu has nothing to say. Su Fengnian pointed his chin at the red snake with 10 fingers on his hands. With your knowledge, you must have seen through the trick. It's a living tool left by the Catman Han Diaosi outside the Shenwu city. Originally, after the Catman died, it would quickly wither away. But Han Xianxia forgot about the abilities of my otherworldly item. His head is a rare treasure in the world, and it taught me a lot of tricks. Han Xianxia had a very interesting saying, "If you respect me, I will respect you tenfold. If you bully me once, I can't wait to bully you forever." The grudge between Beiliang and Mount Longhu should be blamed on Su Xiao or the old emperor. You and I both know very well. How did Prime Minister Yue and Prime Minister Qingci come about? Wasn't it because the old bastard Zhao Huangchao accidentally raised an evil dragon that brought disaster to Earthlung Mountain? Wasn't it because he couldn't suppress it, so he changed his mind at the last minute and changed his mind to appease Mount Longhu, which still had some use for you? Zhao Huangchao went to the capital and asked the old emperor, who should call him third grandpa, for a decree. In the end, he rushed 800 miles and handed it to him. That's how the legend of an immortal entering Mount Longhu with an imperial decree came about. I borrowed a sword from the snowy plains and used a flying sword to suppress Mount Longhu. Do you dare to fart? What, when it comes to me, do you think that just because I'm the son of a vassal king who's fishing for fame, you can show the demeanor of an expert and discuss the Tao with me? Chapter 836. Zhao Ningxin smiled. I've heard Mr. White Lotus say that His Royal Highness is good at doing business. Now that I've seen it, I know it's true. Let me ask His Royal Highness, has the otherworldly item that's been floating at the bottom of the lake been properly prepared? Do we really have to fight to the death? His Royal Highness' life seems to be much more valuable than mine. What if, and I'm saying what if, both jade and stone are destroyed? Would your Highness, who's good at scheming, lose the jade or the stone in this business deal? Su Fengnian's expression was calm as he replied, we don't have to fight to the death. Even if we really wanted to kill you, we might not be able to. After all, Xianxia's realm was like a pavilion in the sky. A Confucian scholar can only talk on paper and learn from each other. In the end, he's too weak compared to a martial artist who stood up from a pile of corpses. His realm is empty, but once he fights, he'll be exposed. Moreover, Xianxia mistakenly thought that I was only relying on my Vajra physique to pester him endlessly. He died a wrong death. Longhu Mountain has been on guard against me for a long time. I reckon we'll have to meet force with force and experience the Taoist's one step into the mysterious finger. In the end, we'll beat you until you can't laugh. No matter what, we'll have to make you half dead. Zhao Ningxin smiled and asked, His Royal Highness is determined to make things difficult for me? Su Fengnian exposed him and sneered. Are you going to wait until Longhu Mountain finishes everything in one fell swoop to enlighten you? Zhao Ningxin closed his eyes and held his breath, trying to hide the faint trace of anger in his eyes. Su Fengnian mocked, even a clay statue is angry? Zhao Ningxin opened his eyes and didn't say anything. He just spread out his hand. Since you say I'm courting death, then come and kill me. This confidence did not come from the reincarnation of the ancestor of the Zhao family, but from the fact that this young Taoist who often got lost in his thoughts had actually blocked Deng Tea's sword when he was still inexperienced. Not long ago, he had even blocked Lu Songtao, who who was both a Buddha and a demon. Su Fengnian supported himself with one hand on the railing and jumped up, looking like he was going to kill the flute-playing Taoist who bore Longhu Mountain's great expectations. However, with Su Fengnian's realm of otherworldly item cultivation, he should have smoothly rushed to Zhao Ningxin. But the latter clearly felt that when Su Fengnian supported himself with the railing, his body stagnated for a moment. This made Zhao Ningxin, who didn't have the ability to predict the future, also stagnated. The boat originally needed to slide back one zhang to have the confidence to block Su Fengnian's attack. But now, the boat was cut in half and stopped half a zhang away. Su Fengnian suddenly moved without any warning. He rushed forward and let go of the railing. The railing behind him shattered into pieces. Zhao Ningxin frowned and didn't move. The boat slid back 1.5 zhang without any wind. When Su Fengnian stretched out his arm to push, Zhao Ningxin put one hand behind his back and the other in front of his chest. The bell didn't make a sound and only struck thunder when it rang. It seemed like a gentle stroke, but it actually created clouds and thunder around his knees. Purple qi lingered around his knees, making Zhao Ningxin look more like an immortal. Su Fengnian didn't rely on his Vajra body like he did when he killed Li Huili and Xianxia. He rushed forward recklessly, his hands dazzlingly tearing apart Zhao Ningxin's purple clouds and thunder. Zhao Ningxin gently lifted his foot and kicked Su Fengnian's abdomen. Su Fengnian also pressed his palm on Zhao Ningxin's forehead. Almost at the same time, he suddenly exerted force. The boat retreated into the fog like an arrow. Su Fengnian quickly floated back to the outer corridor, bent his knees and stepped on the outer wall. He rushed forward like thunder again and the wall collapsed. Zhao Ningxin, who was in the fog, picked up the dark green bamboo flute and twirled his 2 fingers. The bamboo flute was like a bamboo dragonfly stirring up the fog on the lake. It was like splashing water at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian's 5 fingers formed a hook and tried to crush the dark green bamboo flute. He still underestimated the flute's majestic qi. He let go as soon as he touched it. His body was bounced to the side of the lake. His feet splashed a lot of water before he could land on the lake. Zhao Ningxin lightly shouted, "Rise!" The boat rose several feet from the water and barely dodged a sneak attack under the water from a vermilion robe. The latter flashed and disappeared. When the boat fell, Su Fengnian tiptoed and chopped at Zhao Ningxin. The dark green bamboo flute behind him was like a trapped beast. It was strangled by the flying sword Thunderpool sword array. Zhao Ningxin, who also fought barehanded, stepped on the bow of the boat and fell into the lake. The whole boat turned over on the water and smashed back to Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian's hand chopped like an immortal touching the top of the head. He smashed the boat into pieces on the spot. His palm pressed down on the top of the head without slowing down. Half of his body was still in the lake. Zhao Ningxin didn't dodge and let Su Fengnian's palm hit on the top of his head. The lake water shook violently, setting off huge waves and hitting the corridor. Thousands of pounds of lake water poured into the courtyard behind the 2 people. Su Fengnian slowly floats down on a wooden plank on the lake surface after the small boat is broken. That palm actually doesn't touch Zhao Ningxin's head at all. This young Taoist's qi is at its peak, which is unexpected. Zhao Ningxin floated to the surface and finally saw the real face of the otherworldly item behind Su Fengnian. It was in a red robe with 5 arms and a sad face. Zhao Ningxin said in a deep voice, "Since ancient times, evil things have been chaotic. I can tolerate your domineering highness, but I can't tolerate the otherworldly item. Today, even if I have to sacrifice my cultivation, I will enforce justice for heaven." This time, it was Su Fengnian's turn to stretch out a palm with a gloomy face. His eyes were full of hatred, indicating Zhao Ningxin to enforce justice for heaven. What a good enforce justice for heaven. On the top of Guanglu Mountain, there were celestial beings who went out of body. There were celestial beings who were angry and spitting out purple gas. They said that they would enforce justice for heaven. Zhao Ningxin didn't dare to be distracted. He breathed heavily with his palm on the back of his left hand, facing the East Taoist ancestral court Longhu Mountain. "Please." 3 words in 1 word. "Please allow Longhu Mountain. Please celestial beings come down to heaven. Please come down to earth." A portrait of the first ancestor fell to the ground in the mansion of celestial masters. A purple thunder as thick as a pillar blasted down from the sky. After a blink of an eye, Zhao Ningxin's face was blurred and his whole body was purple gold. Chapter 837. There were portraits of the ancestors hanging on the wall of the Temple of Dragon Tiger Mountain. The portrait of the first ancestor fell without any wind. A dozing Taoist boy guarding the hall was so scared that he did not dare to pick up the scroll. He hurriedly reported the situation to the residence of the Taoist master. Xianxia, who was in charge of all Taoist affairs, quickly walked into the Temple of Dragon Tiger Mountain. She was pleasantly surprised, but there was still a trace of worry in her heart. She knelt down in front of the Temple of Dragon Tiger Mountain and carefully picked up the scroll. Bai Yu, an outsider of the residence of the Taoist master, slowly stepped over the threshold. Mr. White Lotus, who thought he was a bookworm, had hurt his eyes from reading, so he walked slower than others. He squatted beside Zhao Donxia and was lost in thought. Zhao Donxia, the head of the Liang Taoist, asked softly, "It's inevitable that fortune and misfortune depend on each other. But in Mr. White Lotus's opinion, how much fortune and misfortune are there?" Bai Yu shook his head and said, "The divinations are a mess." But since Attentive Mind was able to invite the first ancestor of Dragon Tiger Mountain, compared to inviting the 3 modern ancestors 100 years ago to kill Lu Songtao of the devil cult with a 10,000-mile sky thundernail, Attentive Mind can rest assured. Since he is enforcing justice on behalf of heaven, he will most likely use great fortune to eliminate misfortune. Bai Yu really can't think of anyone in the world who can suppress the first ancestor. Wang Xianji is only a few people who can fight, but on the Spring God Lake, Attentive Mind will undoubtedly win. After this battle, it will be a great thing for Dragon Tiger Mountain. Zhao Donxia respectfully hung the portraits of the ancestors in the middle of the wall. After hanging them up, she knelt down and kowtowed. Then she stood up and took a few steps back, looking at the wall that was filled with the portraits of immortals from different dynasties. Even a Zhanren like her felt a little high-spirited. Most of these ancestors who had ascended were the biggest protective talismans of Longhu Mountain. They had stood tall for nearly 1,000 years, while the Liang dynasty had only been around for 200 years. If it wasn't for the fact that the #1 blessed land of Taoism, the Earth Lung Mountain, produced an evil dragon that was related to the Dragon Tiger Mountain and affected the Dragon Pool Golden Aura Lotus, this place would have almost become a pillar of luck that was on par with the heavenly gates. Then, it would be guaranteed that the next 500 years of great fortune would be unimaginable. Zhao Donxia suppressed the haze in her heart and thought of Zhao Ningxian, a direct descendant of the Taoist master's mansion, who had blocked Dong Tai's sword when he came up the mountain to greet the ceremony. Her mood was undoubtedly better. She smiled while twirling her beard. "With such a good seedling like Ningxian, we can invite the ancestor so quickly. It's 20 to 30 years earlier than we expected, so we don't have to worry about the lack of manpower. With Mr. White Lotus's wholehearted support, Mount Longhu will have no worries." Bai Yu suddenly rubbed his eyes hard and stared at the dozens of portraits on the wall with a horrified expression. Mr. White Lotus's vision was weak, but his mind was sharp. He vaguely sensed that there was a strange phenomenon. Zhao Donxia's cultivation was profound, so she was only a step slower than Bai Yu. She noticed the abnormality of the portraits on the wall, which had never been seen before. Almost all the portraits of the ancestors showed signs of collapsing. Only the portrait that looked like Xianxia was able to escape. None of the others were lucky enough to escape. Bai Yu muttered absent-mindedly, "Impossible, impossible." The feather minister was uneasy. He knelt down heavily with his right hand covering the back of his left hand and sobbed. This unfilial descendant, Zhao Donxia, kneels down and begs the ancestors to show mercy. In the night, Mount Longhu seemed peaceful, but in fact, there were turbulent undercurrents. A year after Mount Wudong was sealed off, most of the Taoist temples began to welcome pilgrims from all over the world again. However, the temple with a statue of Jianghu the Great was still closed to visitors. Chen Zhao and Song Jiming, who were the most senior Taoist priests, lived in seclusion and rarely came out. They only occasionally went in and out of this temple. Fortunately, Mount Wudong was used to these kind old Taoist priests being elusive. Unlike other famous Taoist caves and blessed lands, the slightly senior Taoist priests were busy entertaining high-ranking officials and dignitaries. How could they have the time to concentrate on cultivation? After the old chief, Wang Zhonglo, Mount Longhu had 2 young new chiefs. However, the incense in Mount Wudong did not decline but instead became more and more prosperous. This made the Taoist and Taoist children on the mountain feel happy. However, with the example of the senior Taoist, they did not feel that they should be condescending when the incense was prosperous. Even the youngest chief in the history of Wudong, Li Yufu, was no different from an ordinary Taoist. Other than personally teaching subjects every day, he often set up a stall to tell the fortunes of ordinary pilgrims. Some illiterate pilgrims also asked him to write letters home. Li Yufu did not refuse any of them and wrote in regular script meticulously. The pilgrims all said that after sending letters, their families became more prosperous. In the beginning, pilgrims from scholarly families advised the people that disturbing the chief would delay the great Taoist master's cultivation to achieve immortality. However, Li Yufu personally comforted the people, saying that cultivation was to cultivate to be an ordinary person. It did not matter if one could not cultivate to become an immortal. Eating, sleeping, reading, and writing were all part of the cultivation, which meant that they were cultivating to be an ordinary person. Once they cultivated to have a normal heart, it did not matter if they could not cultivate to become an immortal. Eating, sleeping, reading, and writing were all part of the cultivation. A maxim began to circulate in Jianghu. The people of Jianghu cultivated immortality, but Mount Wudong cultivated ordinary life. In the temple, Chen Yao, the most senior person of Mount Wudong who was in charge of discipline, stood solemnly at the threshold of the temple. He looked at the statue of Jianghu Great Emperor in the temple. Beside him was Song Jiming, who was more than 140 years old and had experienced 4 chiefs, and Yu Xingrui, the master of the current chief of Mount Wudong, Li Yufu. The 3 Taoist priests looked extremely solemn. Yu Xingrui was a person who could not hold back his words. He whispered to his 2 senior brothers, when His Royal Highness returned to Bailiang after traveling Jianghu for the second time, he kept asking us about the difference between Mount Longhu and Mount Wudong's methods of inviting deities. According to the scale of this grand ritual of Zhou Tian, which deity of Mount Wudong would you like to invite? Originally, if little junior brother was willing to ascend, it would not be too difficult to invite ancestor Lu to descend. At least it would be slightly easier than attaining immortality. But then again, even if it is not as difficult as ascending to heaven, with His Royal Highness's current cultivation, the key has never been cultivation. Even with Mount Wudong's 81 peaks as the grand ritual of Zhou Tian, it may not be possible to invite a deity who should not be tainted by the mortal world. Senior brother Chen, senior brother Song, to be honest, I've always been unwilling to let Mount Wudong get involved in the secular world's struggle for tripod cauldrons. It goes against ancestor Lu's teachings. Song Jiming smiled and said, Mount Longhu is anxious. They can't wait to transfer the fate of the entire Dragon Lake to that little celestial master so that he can enlighten his orifices. But cultivation is like climbing a mountain. One has to be down to earth and climb the stairs. There is no such thing as letting the mountain come and help me. Mount Longhu has produced many deities with the surname Zhao, but, before the old Taoist priest could finish, Chen Yao suddenly turned around. A bolt of purple thunder smashed down from the sky. Chen Yao frowned and said, That little celestial master is indeed not vulgar. He forcefully enlightened his orifices at such a young age. How good would it be if he could do it step by step? There is one more fully deserving Taoist priest in the world. So what if he suppresses Mount Wudong? At this time, the 3 seniors of Mount Wudong did not know that the 5 words, banishment to 3,000 miles, on the statue of Jianghu the Great behind them were gradually disappearing. Chapter 838. On the Spring God Lake, there were many navy warships. The king of Jing, Zhao Sun, personally boarded one of the yellow dragon warships. Beside the king, who was wearing a bright yellow robe, there was a woman with a white veil covering her face. She had a graceful figure. The strategist behind the scenes, who had been following him like a shadow, did not follow him today. The reason was that Zhao Sun was selfish. After the sudden death of the old king of Jing, Zhao Heng, the number of trusted aides of the young king could be counted with one hand. Among them, there was only one man and one woman that he trusted. There was no need to talk about the blind Lu Su. Both the old and the new king treated him as a national scholar. Zhao Sun was also well aware that in addition to the shaky title of king of Jing, the most precious thing was still the strategist with extraordinary military strategy. Zhao Sun sincerely valued Lu Su, even to the point of reverence. But because of this, when Lu Su intentionally or unintentionally showed indifference to the woman beside him, it made Zhao Sun very embarrassed. He was afraid that Lu Su would be displeased. As the lord of Qingzhou, he never brought the woman into the Jing palace. Instead, he hid her in a golden house in the city. For her, he even avoided the matter of concubines several times. It was enough to show her position in the young king's heart. Zhao Sun quietly reached out his hand, wanting to hold her hand, but she gently glared at him. The young king resentfully withdrew his hand. Not only was he not annoyed by her insensitivity, he was instead full of joy. This kind of woman was the most similar to the woman who was destined to be unattainable in this life. Nominally, the previous Princess Jing'an, Pei Nanwei, had already died for love. If she was at his beck and call, and obedient to his every command, even if the woman beside him looked like Pei Nanwei, Zhao Sun would not favor her and would have long regarded her as a chicken rib. Zhao Sun looked around. The Qingzhou Navy was majestic in his eyes. He was also confident that he could make the Qingzhou Navy more powerful than the Guangling Navy. At this time, his heart was full of ambition. He reached out a hand and pointed to the river, as if he was talking about the country, and said, "Nanwei, father could not control the Qingzhou Navy at all, let alone make the Green Party bow their heads. But I did it, and it only took a year." The woman said with a gentle voice, "Mr. Liu is a pillar of great talent that even Grand Preceptor Sun and Grand Preceptor Zhang have repeatedly praised. Living in Xiangfan is already an injustice. You absolutely cannot have the slightest bit of complaint towards Mr. Liu just because Mr. Liu doesn't like me. If Mr. Liu only listens to your preferences, then people will look down on you." Zhao Sun was even more delighted when he heard this. He nodded. "Don't worry about this. As long as I, Zhao Sun, am rich, I will not let Mr. Liu be poor. What Yan Qi King Xiaobing can give Nalan Yusi, I can only give Mr. Liu more." The woman coldly reprimanded. "What's the point of saying these flowery words? You know that Mr. Liu does not care about those empty titles. Your temper is too frivolous." Zhao Sun laughed loudly. "That's right. You should calm down." There was a moment of silence. Zhao Sun looked at the 800 Li Spring Immortal Lake and said in a low voice, "One day, I will give you the Spring Immortal Lake." Zhao Sun swears that these words are not false. The corner of the woman's mouth rose. Outside the city of Xiangfan, a group of travelers arrived. 2 carriages passed through the city but did not enter. There were rich men, powerful men, a fat pig, and several retainers who caused people to be intimidated at first glance. Approaching the fork in the reed pond, the 2 carriages stopped at the same time. The old man got off the carriage. He walked with a slight limp and his hands on his hips, which could not hide his hunchback. He muttered to himself, "This is the place where he killed the 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin? And he killed that old woman, Zhao Heng's trusted cavalry with a single spear?" The fat pig eagerly approached and said with a smile, "Father, His Highness said that he would draw his sword before he killed, and that he would return it to its scabbard after he killed." Ning'e Mei and the 100 Phoenix battalions were completely convinced at that time. The old man with yellow spots on his hands and face smiled. He squatted down and grabbed a handful of soil. Holding it in his hand, he looked at the reeds in a daze. The old man murmured, "After Huang Zhenta brought him back to Beiliang, he told me that this child scolded me every day and was full of resentment. But he always found excuses to go to places where I fought in the past to take a walk and take a look." The fat pig squatted down and felt uncomfortable holding it in. He simply sat down on the ground and said with a smile, "Father, His Highness has a sharp tongue but a soft heart. He is stubborn on the surface, but in his heart, he admires you very much. Most sons are like this." The old man dismissed it with a smile. He tilted his palm and watched the soil slide down. He said softly, "Such a child who has a sword god and a death warrior protecting him, and who is so timid that he doesn't even dare to take off his soft armor when he sleeps. Why did he go to Beimang and risk his life for the 5th raccoon? The night before he went to Beimang, he drank with me. Before he died, he cried and told me that he had a dream that was not a dream. On the top of Kuanglu Mountain, there was a celestial being called Zhao Huangchao who had an out-of-body state and killed his mother's soul. He said that sooner or later, he would kill that fellow. When this child first started to practice the saber, I actually did not think highly of him. But I know that revenge is one thing. Wanting to take revenge is a matter of course. Whether he can do it or not is another matter. But if he wants to take revenge, whether he will do it or not, whether he will suffer hardships and then give up is another matter. In terms of status, if you add up all the places in Liang and Beimang, or even up to the spring and autumn period in the Central Plains, the number of people who are better than him can't be counted with 2 hands. However, to be able to dare to kill Su Huainan, kill the 5th raccoon, kill Luo Yang, kill the celestial being, and persist in doing what he wants to do step by step, it really can't be considered many. The old man wiped his sleeve with the hand that was grabbing the mud, and then took out a jade bracelet that had a few strands of green left in it from his other sleeve. The jade was dropping too quickly, not to mention that it was of a tender type and had a poor water source, so it wasn't worth much. The old man smiled and said, "When I was young, I had the best taste in women in the world, so I was a complete mess when it came to choosing these things. I wholeheartedly wanted to earn money to buy something presentable for my future wife, but I couldn't save any money, so I shamelessly borrowed 50 taels of silver from Sun Ping. In the end, I bought this damn bracelet, but it began to drop a few days after I gave it to her. Only then did I know that I had been cheated badly. However, the child's mother didn't mind and kept wearing it." The old man placed the bracelet on his skinny cheeks. "It was cool," he said softly. "That night, bald Donkey Yang asked me to drink. She said she was going out to buy more wine. She took off the bracelet and put it in her room. At that time, I didn't think much of it." The old man continued speaking. He put the bracelet back and slowly stood up. He calmly said, "Whoever dares to obstruct the scholars from moving north into Bailiang, kill them." Bailiang's tiger paw attack was unknown. At the lakeside of the Spring God Lake in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, it was unknown whether it was Zhao Ningxian from the Celestial Master Mansion or the first Grandmaster of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. The Taoist priest was covered in purple gold. His face was blurry, but he had a majestic celestial aura. When an ordinary man was angry, blood would splatter 3 feet. When the emperor was angry, millions of corpses would fall. So what if the celestial was angry? The Taoist priest, whose aura was even more imposing than Guanglu Mountain's Chenglong Zhao Huang Chao, shouted, "How dare you, Su Fengnian, use the Yin object to bring chaos to the human world? You don't know that the net of heaven has a long arm. Under the majestic heaven's way, why don't you surrender?" The Spring God Lake was turbulent. The lake's waves rose more than 10 feet high. They were almost as high as the mountain villa's eaves. The Taoist priest floated. Not a single drop of the lake water flowed into the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. Su Fengnian laughed savagely. His laughter spread throughout the mountain villa. The Celestial was furious. This evil ant in front of him dared to be so impudent. Su Fengnian restrained his laughter. His expression was solemn. "You and that Zhao Huang Chao, open your dog eyes and see who is the real mortal." Above the Spring God Lake, the world suddenly lit up. It was as bright as day. Su Fengnian closed his eyes. His hands were placed in front of his abdomen, as if he was leaning on a sword. There was a turtle in the Spring God Lake. There was a wordless heavenly steel on the turtle's back. The turtle's back, which was as big as a hill, slowly appeared. Su Fengnian stood alone. Behind him, a celestial's golden foot suddenly stepped on the turtle's back. A giant python rolled out of the lake and coiled around the turtle. After the golden foot, a glorious golden body appeared in the world. It was 100 feet tall and looked down on the world. The Jianghu Great Emperor guarded the north and ruled the Black Tortoise. The sound of Sanskrit and heavenly music was endless. A celestial maiden scattered flowers in the sky. They appeared in a flash and then disappeared in a flash. Su Fengnian said slowly with an expressionless face. His voice was as loud as a bell. "How can a celestial be in front of Jianghu?" The face of Zhao Ningxian, who was more majestic than the emperor of the mortal world, suddenly blurred and became clear. The purple and gold aura around his body could not be maintained. With a slight hesitation, Jianghu Great Emperor, who was hundreds of feet tall, raised his hand and chopped down with a huge sword that did not have a solid shape. It directly shattered the so-called celestial body of the first dragon tiger sex ancestral master. 1,000 miles away, the dragon lake in the heavenly master mansion was boiling. None of the lotus of providence was left. They all withered and withered, leaving only a small bud floating helplessly. A middle-aged Taoist living on Mount Longhu was flustered and exasperated. His body seemed to be bound by the supreme heavenly Tao. His knees were forced to the ground, creating 2 pits. That was not all. His head was pressed down as well. The Taoist faced Jianghu and knelt down. The Taoist who didn't cultivate the heavenly Tao and only lived in seclusion said with difficulty, "Dragon Tiger Mountain has harmed the Zhao family." Chapter 839. Zhao Ningxian, who had been beaten back to his original form, stood on the Spring God Lake in a daze. He was truly out of his wits. His red robe fluttered around him like a glutton eating a plate of delicious food. Su Fengnian ignored the young Taoist who had mobilized so many people to invite the first Taoist master. He stepped on the Kuei turtle and carried the wordless stone tablet on his back as he paddled towards the Spring God Lake. Jianghu Great Emperor's golden body turned around and faced the Qingzhou navy. In an instant, they were only a few miles apart. Su Fengnian lifted his foot and Jianghu Great Emperor followed like a shadow. He lifted his golden foot and was about to stomp down. The navy warship surrounded the shore of the Spring God Lake in an arc. The yellow dragon warship that the king of Jing and Zhao Sun was the first ship to bear the brunt of the attack. It was about to be stomped down by the golden body. Most of the sailors had already prostrated themselves on the ground and awaited their deaths. The retinue of the king's mansion was much more decisive. They ignored the fear in their hearts and leaped up in an attempt to block the foot of the immortal for the young king. In an instant, more than 20 people took out their weapons and rushed towards Jianghu Great Emperor. However, they were all crushed back to the ship by the power of the stomp. Zhao Sun's face was pale. He held the cold hand of the woman beside him and looked at the sky. Just when Zhao Sun thought that he was going to die, a man in a plain Taoist robe swept across the water like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. He stepped on the flags of the warships and crashed into Jianghu Great Emperor's foot. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment but still stepped down slowly. Jianghu Great Emperor continued to step down. The young Taoist's shoulder was badly mutilated. He gritted his teeth and said, "Your Highness, you can't rely on the power of heaven to kill people. Even if you use the black tortoise Dharmakaya for a moment, the celestial court and your real body will." Su Fengnian was expressionless as he continued to step down. The young Taoist was already forced to land on the yellow dragon warship. The entire warship began to sink into the lake, leaving only the king of Jing'an and Zhao Sun above the surface of the lake. After the Taoist panted, he knelt down on one knee and resisted Jianghu Great Emperor's golden body and golden feet. He told Su Fengnian intermittently in a secret language with great difficulty, "Huaibei's ranger He Zhu risked his life to deliver a token to your highness. It can't be delayed. At this moment, he has already rushed to the outside of the Quick Snow Villa. His life is hanging by a thread." Su Fengnian frowned and withdrew his foot. Jianghu Great Emperor finally could not maintain his 100-feet golden body and slowly dissipated. The wordless monument on the back of the big turtle cracked inch by inch. Su Fengnian looked back with a complicated expression. Originally, with Zhao Ningxin's cultivation and the foundation of Dragon Tiger Mountain, the first generation of the founding ancestor, and the other invited the supreme Dharmakaya of Jianghu Great Emperor. Both Dragon Tiger Mountain and Wudong Mountain could be said to have used all their strength. Even a blind man would know who was better and who was worse. Originally, with Zhao Ningxin's cultivation and the foundation of Dragon Tiger Mountain, the founding ancestor could be free and unfettered in the human world for the time it takes to burn 3 incense sticks of incense, while the Jianghu Great Emperor that Su Fengnian invited could only last for half an incense stick's time. However, Su Fengnian did not have much regret about it. Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Emperor of the capital, the two Zhao families, had long been integrated into one. They shared fate and shared honor and disgrace. This time, he just treated it as beating a dog to show his master. Su Fengnian's original intention was to lure the celestial being Zhao Huangchao to the Spring God Lake one day, and kill both the celestial being and the celestial being. Zhao Ningxin was just by accident that Su Fengnian had no choice but to reveal the heaven secret and his trump card. However, Su Fengnian did not have much regret about it. The two Zhao families, Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Emperor of the capital, had long been integrated into one. They shared fate and honor. This time, he just treated it as beating a dog to show his master. Su Fengnian glanced at the young leader of Wudong who was kneeling on the ground to send off Jianghu Great Emperor's 1,000-feet golden body. He did not have any ill feelings towards this young Taoist. In the long run, he had good intentions for stopping him from stepping on the Spring God Lake. Taking a deep breath, Su Fengnian covered his forehead with one hand. After the sharp pain, he was in a trance for a moment. His mind was as blank as a sheet of paper, as if he had forgotten something extremely important. However, he just could not remember it. Su Fengnian shook his head. Li Yufu staggered to his feet. His lips moved slightly as he sent a secret message, that He Zhu is seriously injured. The sword qi in his body has already formed a shadow. He is only relying on the help of this little Taoist to keep him alive. He will not live for long. Your Highness, please go out of the villa and meet him. Su Fengnian rushed back to the villa and stood on the roof of the courtyard to look down. He saw that a rider took advantage of the turmoil in the villa and rushed straight to the gate. The young ranger seemed to be trying his best to say something. However, at this time, The people in the villa were so shocked by the 1,000 feet golden body that came and went that they had no time to care about such a rude nobody. The galloping ranger was like a headless fly. His chest was covered with blood, his face was pale, and he was about to fall off the horse. In his blurred vision, the ranger saw a figure rushing over from the wall and helping him down from the horse. He sat on the ground against the wall and blood kept oozing out from the fingers covering his mouth. The white-haired young master in front of him knocked on several aperture acupoints to stop the vicious sword chi that was wantonly running around in his body. The young master asked in a deep voice, "I am Su Fengnian. What do you want to give me?" The ugly ranger took out a hairpin from his arms and handed it to Su Fengnian with trembling hands. He said in a hoarse voice, "I am He Zhu. I met a young devil who killed people on the street and was seriously injured. I was saved by a Miss Jia. She asked me to send this hairpin to Beiliang." She said that she and young Master Su did not owe each other anything. Due to the final radiance of the setting sun before his death, He Zhu, who had regained some of his vigor, squeezed out an ugly smile and said slowly, "I was injured by the sword chi and rushed to Beiliang. I heard that there were scholars from Shangyin Academy who were rushing to Beiliang, so I wanted to go with them. I could only blame myself for being incompetent and fainted halfway. Fortunately, I was saved by Zhenren Li, the leader of Wudong sect. Then I knew that young Master Su was in the villa. If I had known that young Master Su was His Royal Highness in Beiliang, I would not have agreed to this at that time. After all, the He family in Huaibei was exterminated by General Su. But since I have promised Miss Jia, I have to keep my promise. I have to." Su Fengnian held the blood-stained hairpin tightly and asked softly, "How is Miss Jia?" The ugly ranger said worriedly, "I only know that Miss Jia has been fighting with 3 powerful devils for a long time. One of them has an amazing sword chi and killed people along the way. He calls himself Cut Willow. The other 2 also have an accent of Bei Mang. Zhenren Li of Wudong sect has revealed the secret of heaven. They are most likely level 1 masters in Bei Mang. When Miss Jia gave me the hairpin, she was in Jianghu City, which is more than 200 miles away from here. She was seriously injured in an alley called Plum Alley in the south of the city. I hope young Master Su can hurry to rescue her." Su Fengnian nodded and held his hand. He slowly injected genuine qi into his hand to prolong his life. "I see." He Zhu shook his head and said, "Young Master Su, you don't have to worry about my life or death." Li Yufu floated over. Su Fengnian stood up and bowed deeply to He Zhu. Li Yufu said softly, "Your Highness, don't worry. You can go north. Yufu will send Brother He on his last journey." Su Fengnian's hands pressed down lightly, and the ground shook. His body rose from the ground like a rainbow, crossing the sky and crossing the quick snow mountain villa. Li Yufu squatted in front of He Zhu and held his pale face with both hands. The horse, which had been dependent on its master for many years, came to He Zhu's side. It lowered its head and touched He Zhu. Then it knelt on the ground and leaned against the corner of the wall to shelter its master from the cold. He Zhu asked with a smile, "Zhenren Li, do you have any wine to drink?" Li Yufu, whose shoulder was stained with blood, was in a dilemma. He Zhu shook his head and said with a smile, "Forget it. I don't have any money for wine." It was said that people were so poor that they could only make a ringing sound. However, He Zhu's pockets didn't make any ringing sounds at all. He Zhu had only been a wine tax collector in a small town. He was not good at reading people's faces. After a few years of muddle-headedness, the money he earned was only enough to take the horse that the military camp did not want. He wanted to walk around Jianghu and see. If only he could use poetry to buy wine. Young man is chivalrous and makes friends with 5 heroes. Liver and gallbladder holes. Hair stands up. In the negotiation, life and death are the same. A promise is worth 1,000 gold. A promise is worth 1,000 gold. The young paladin's murmur gradually faded away. Li Yufu did not want to let go for a long time. After a long time, the horse whimpered. Li Yufu stood up and put He Zhu on the horse's back. He led the horse out of the snow mountain villa slowly. Chapter 840. I originally said that I would upload the big chapter today. P.S. There is a WeChat public platform on the book in the snow. You can add me as a friend after scanning it. The villages of Tian Village were scattered all over the place. There were more than 6,000 trees planted in a large orange garden. The yellow oranges produced by the oranges were the second-class tributes of the imperial palace. However, after winter, the oranges were not full of fruits. However, there was a custom in the orange garden that every orange tree would leave one orange for the winter, which meant that there would be enough left to welcome the new year. No matter how bold the naughty children in the village were, they did not dare to climb the trees to steal the oranges. Every time they played around the orange garden, they only dared to look from afar. At this time, the orange garden was vaguely red. A young man in a green robe who looked like a scholar broke into the orange garden. He gently flicked his fingers and some weather-beaten red oranges fell down. He held them in his arms. Without peeling the skin, he ate half of the oranges in one bite and chewed. The handsome scholar was followed by a skinny old man with an ordinary face, who looked like an orange farmer guarding the garden. The young man grabbed an orange and grinned at the old man. The old man shook his head, indicating that he was not interested in the orange. The young man chewed the orange meat and peel and said vaguely in Baimang language, "The south of Liang River is really a good place where people won't starve to death. In the future, if I kill all the way here, I must get a good land from Li Mibi. I don't need to be an official." The old man glanced at the young man's back. There were 3 cocoon-like holes, which forcibly blocked the injuries. 2 swords and 1 knife had penetrated his body. Fortunately, he was still alive. The young man who was seriously injured did not care. He took 2 bites of an orange and quickly finished a whole bag of oranges. He reached out and patted the dust on his clothes, which affected his wounds. He could not help but grit his teeth and gently brushed a cocoon wound on his chest with a finger. The other 2 sore holes on his body were still manageable, but the knife wound under his finger was insidious. It was caused by a hand knife, which was not inferior to his specialty, Lu Qingyin. Thinking of the girl who carried a withered sunflower, the young man felt a headache. If he had known earlier, he would have continued to fight with a black-clothed youth outside the city instead of exchanging opponents with the sword Qi. At that time, he only thought that the unknown girl was fierce, but she was not as powerful as Su Longxiang, who was born with a Vajra body. In Xinwu City, he used a skillful sword to exchange for Su Longxiang's 2 swords with only brute force. He did not feel that he was at a disadvantage. In fact, he had a slight advantage. However, he really could not withstand the expressionless gaze of the youth, who pulled out the willow shadow sword from his body. It was a pity that the short sword that he always carried with him was twisted into a piece of scrap iron by the youth. A section of willow dressed in a scholar's attire turned his head and laughed. "Old moth, I heard that Huang Qing fought with that kid until the sky darkened and the earth darkened. Just the sword alone was twisted into a piece of scrap iron by the youth?" The old man with a strange name nodded his head. Seeing that the cocoon on a willow was bleeding, he quickened his pace and stuck to his back. White thread seeped out of his fingertips and slowly weaved a cocoon on the wound of the willow. Out of the corner of the old man's eyes, there was a tall and burly figure standing on a small slope, as if he was looking into the distance. He flicked an orange from the willow and threw it to his companion, who was a head taller than him. That person did not even turn his head. After catching the orange, he rubbed it in his palms and fell into a daze. It was a woman. Her figure was fat and the clothes she wore were too loose for a 7-foot man, but it still looked tight on her. She wore a Baimang woman's 5 weapons pendant on her head, and her face was smeared with yellow tassels. Unfortunately, her appearance was below average. Not only did it not add to her beauty, but it also made her look nondescript. A jade belt was tied around her waist. Hanging from it were small knives, small pouches, small flints, and many other small and practical objects. It was a dazzling array. She looked like a woman who knew how to live her life. She glanced at her, squatted on the ground, and rubbed his cheeks hard. He sighed heavily. He and 2 other genuine level 1 masters were still being chased by the little girl. Where was the justice? He and Old Moth were not only level 1 masters, but also the top figures in the spiderweb who were extremely proficient in assassination. If the news spread out, not only would he lose face, but the spiderweb would also lose face. Even Old Moth, one of the 2 cocoons of the spiderweb, said that the little girl was born to be in this bowl of rice. However, the little girl's days were bleak. She suffered from Old Moth's cocoon bind in Murong Nyang's palm, and one of her arms was crippled by him. She was not far from death, but she was still unwilling to give up. Until today, Old Moth thought that the next time she showed up, it would be the day she completely left Jianghu. Old Moth looked around and said to himself, "The little girl is proficient in Chiman Duanjia. She is an expert in both earth escape and water escape. Last time, we suffered a loss by the river. Princess Murong specially chose this village with soft soil and many ditches. She probably wants to generously give the little girl a chance to end this long-distance raid, so that we don't have to worry about her.
Old Moth sneered and said, "The little girl is very clever.
She won't take the bait." Chapter 841. Beimeng's cobweb elder, who was nicknamed Old Moth, shook his head and laughed. The young lady's methods are ingenious, but unfortunately, her body can't keep up. She's continuously injured and won't be able to hold on for long. If the princess is more ruthless, she won't even give us this opportunity.
With the three of them relying on each other, the young lady might have died silently on the way.
It's a pity. The princess is different from us, who licks blood on the edge of our blades. She's more broad-minded.
One section Willow glanced at the sturdy back of the woman and smiled knowingly.
Not only is she broad-minded, but her breasts are also slightly bigger. Old Moth wasn't a sly official, but he didn't continue.
After all, the young lady was a junior of the same clan who was favored by the empress.
Beimeng had two royal surnames, Murong Baoding, who had been famous for a long time. Among the younger generation, there were also martial arts newcomers like Yelu Dongchuang and Murong Longshui. Their cultivation realms were even higher than Tuoba Chun's son, who had just entered the Vajra realm. Although Princess Murong's looks were indeed a little out of the ordinary, she had a good reputation in Beimeng. She was familiar with the local customs of Liang like a scholar from the Central Plains.
What was even rarer was that even though she was a descendant of the imperial family and had absolute arts, her temperament wasn't the slightest bit disagreeable. If it were any other lady of the imperial family who heard one section Willow's criticism, they would fly into a rage out of humiliation on the spot. The woman who was as famous as Yelu Dongchuang was flipping oranges in her palm. For some reason she thought of something. Her aunt smiled and asked her, if Beimeng annexed Liang, they would inevitably be affected by the customs of the Central Plains. How long would the Beimeng men be able to continue practicing martial arts? If they couldn't even hold on for 100 years, what was the point of Beimeng marching south? At that time, there was also a princess who liked marten headscarves. Her answer was that millions of people would die in exchange for the unification of Great Qin in the next 100 years. It would be a profit, not to mention that her aunt's name would be remembered for 1,000 years. No matter how lousy a shopkeeper or scheme was, it wouldn't be a loss. Murong Longshui clearly remembered that when the lady who was also a princess said this, her eyes were sharp as she looked at him provocatively. Murong Longshui's mood became a bit gloomy. During this journey with Senior Yi Lu and Spider Web, they were constantly harassed by that little girl. Yi Lu was obviously annoyed. In the dangerous battles, she had killed more than 30 innocent women and children. Even though she wasn't happy about this, she couldn't say anything. Beimeng and Liang seemed to be peaceful on the surface, but that was only because of the lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. During the several expeditions to the north, the soldiers who died in battle didn't have time to bury their bodies and had to dig up graves. Over the years, the people of Beimeng had dug up their graves countless times. They shouldn't implicate their wives and daughters, and the dead were more important. It was better to squash enmity than to keep it alive. Many of these universal principles were not worth mentioning in the face of national enmity. Murong Longshui had traveled alone to Beimeng many times and had seen many children in the north. Even though their ancestors had stayed away from the chaos of war for generations, when Liang was mentioned, they would all grit their teeth and look ferocious. There was not a single bit of innocence to speak of. One of the tribes spent a lot of money to buy a Central Plains woman who had been kidnapped to Beimeng. She had been pregnant for several months, but she was cut open and died. A group of youths who weren't familiar with horse riding wantonly stepped on her corpse. Murong Longshui, who suddenly came back to his senses, saw the scene in his field of vision and was clearly stunned. A skinny girl carrying a withered sunflower walked over lightly. The closest Murong Longshui got to her was when he was escorting a branch of willow to escape. In an alley, he was slashed diagonally by the little girl's hand blade. Even though he crossed his arms to block the attack, he was still sent flying several feet away. However, the girl did not have it easy either. She was bound by one of the twin cocoons of the spider web. Murong Longshui did not care about bullying her with numbers. After rolling, he bounced back up and landed a solid palm strike on the girl's body. The young assassin smashed through the alley wall and disappeared in a flash. Murong Longshui did not care about bullying her with numbers. After rolling, he bounced back up and landed a solid palm strike on the girl's body. The young assassin crashed into the alley wall and disappeared in a flash. Murong Longshui did not have much malice towards her. However, this girl's disruption had delayed too much of the Taiping commandery's plan. She had to die. A branch of willow stared at the young assassin and said in bewilderment, "With her current pitiful state, there is still a slight chance of success if we ambush her."
She walked out so openly. Does she think we are scared? Old Moth hesitated. She most likely has a method of mutual destruction. A branch of willow shook his head. With the chaotic aura she exudes, she doesn't have that ability. Old Moth said in a low voice, "I remember Master said that there is fate above aura." A branch of willow immediately laughed. "Princess Murong, this girl is already an arrow at the end of its flight. I'll leave her to you." Although he said so, the 3 first-rank masters began to spread out quickly. Murong Longshui, who was walking down the slope, was in the middle. A branch of willow and Old Moth were on the left and right respectively. They were prepared to surround the girl who had crashed into a place of certain death. The girl who was carrying a branch moved her lips slightly. She seemed to be calculating the distance between them. The 4 of them looked up almost at the same time. Between the girl and the 3 of them, an uninvited guest crashed down from the sky with a loud bang. Amidst the commotion, the white-haired young man had his hands in his sleeves. His back was facing the assassin while he faced Murong Longshui and the other 2. Chapter 842. The tall and sturdy Murong Longshui stared fixedly at this guy who had appeared out of nowhere. In Liang, the imperial court clamped down on the discussion, and only a few rumors managed to slip through the net. Therefore, the discussions about the crown prince of Beiliang were mostly superficial. They talked about how domineering he was in Great Peace City, and how he made enemies with the students of the Imperial College. However, Beimang was completely different. It was precisely because of this guy's trip to Beimang that the world was turned upside down. Murong Longshui and the old enemy with the surname of Yelu were both interested in Liang because of him, so they personally went down south. No matter what kind of dishonorable and crooked method this person used to kill Raccoon Diwu, Murong Longshui still admired him. If she put herself in his shoes, she believed that if she went up against Tuoba Chun's son, who was protected by 2 great demons, the rainbow python and the lightning spear, then she would have a slim chance of survival. Murong Longshui hesitated for a moment and stared at this man of the same age who was tired from traveling and whose lips were chapped. Before a fierce battle that was destined to be a life-and-death battle, she smiled and threw the tangerine in her hand out. She thought that if this man generously accepted the tangerine and ate it before fighting, it would be a wonderful thing that could accompany drinking in the future. He naturally had a heroic demeanor of not caring about life and death. However, the tangerine had just been thrown into the air when it exploded, splashing juice all over Murong Longshui. Murong Longshui furrowed her thick brows. This crown prince of Beiliang was too petty. A man's Jianghu was mostly black, white, and gray. A woman's Jianghu was filled with many different thoughts. Murong Longshui was no exception. Yu Lu saw Murong Longshui suffer and was secretly delighted. His mind was filled with the comical scene of a handsome guy being pressed down by a 200 kilograms female warrior and beaten into a pig head. Old Moth was not as carefree as Old Moth. His footsteps were steady and he was not in a hurry. The current situation was no different from a heaven-sent opportunity for the 3 of them. That crown prince was being dragged down by the heavily injured young lady. It would be easier for him to fight the 3 of them alone. A willow leapt onto the branch of an orange tree beside him and looked into the distance, ensuring that there were no large groups of cavalry participating in the encirclement. It was better to be safe than sorry in other people's territory. After Su Fengnian landed on the ground, she took a deep breath and ran towards Murong Longshui, who was the closest to her. Along the way, she bypassed several orange trees that were bleak and desolate. Unlike Su Fengnian, she was so agile that she crashed into Su Fengnian. The 2 of them instantly collided. Su Fengnian pushed Murong Longshui's knee down with one hand and her 5 fingers were like hooks, slashing at Murong Longshui's thigh fiercely. The moment before the flying swords pierced into Murong Longshui's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It threw branches at Murong Longshui and Murong Longshui, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshui crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and the sky was filled with broken branches. Murong Longshui ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshui's chest. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian made a decision that would cause both of them to lose. Not only did she not pull back her fists, she planted her feet into the ground, and her fists moved smoothly. Just as all the flying swords were about to pierce into Murong Longshue's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It continuously threw branches at Murong Longshue and Murong Longshue, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshue crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and branches and leaves filled the air. Murong Longshue ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshue's chest. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian made a decision that would cause both of them to lose. Not only did she not pull back her fists, she planted her feet into the ground, and her fists moved smoothly. Just as all the flying swords were about to pierce into Murong Longshue's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It continuously threw branches at Murong Longshue and Murong Longshue, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshue crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and the sky was filled with broken branches. Murong Longshue ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshue's chest. Su Fengnian's fists collided with Murong Longshue's chest. She instantly made a decision that would cause both of them to suffer. Plus, not only did she not withdraw her fists, but she also realized that the flying swords within 10 feet were like locusts. Su Fengnian pointed his forehead downwards and knocked on Su Fengnian's head. Murong Longshue's majestic body swung backwards, but his arms were held back by Su Fengnian, not giving him a chance to escape. Murong Longshue roared angrily and shook his arms, causing ripples to spread out and shake off the restraints. Su Fengnian's 10 fingers drew 10 bloody grooves on her arms so deep that her bones could be seen. Murong Longshue lowered her head, and her thigh-thick arms quickly wrapped around Su Fengnian's shoulders. If anyone saw this, they would mistake it for a lover's warm embrace, and it would be difficult to tell that there was killing intent hidden in all directions. Murong Longshue's body fell backwards, pulling Su Fengnian's entire body into the air. He tried to send Su Fengnian's head into the mud. Su Fengnian's hands gently patted on the wet mud, and in an instant, it was as if fog was rising in spirals. Murong Longshue's attempt to distance herself from Su Fengnian, and at the same time, she also wanted to throw herself under the willow's shade. Murong Longshue, who was lying in the snow and mud, let go of her hands. She wanted to get up like a carp and take the initiative earlier than Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian, who was originally head down, instantly flipped her body upside down after that pat. Both of her hands pressed against Murong Longshue's cheeks, and the two of them looked at each other. It was another scene that was brewing under the illusion of warmth. Previously, Murong Longshue had caught a tangerine that Willow had tossed to her and rolled it in his palm. This time it was exactly the same. Su Fengnian seemed to want to treat her head as an orange. Murong Longshue's expression changed drastically, and in an instant, her fists and knees were like a torrential downpour. Ever since she debuted, the extraordinary woman from Beimang, who was known for her close combat skills, actually only wanted to distance herself from Su Fengnian. However, no matter how fierce her attacks were, Su Fengnian only supported her head and closed the gap between her palms inch by inch. His body remained unmoving, and he received all of Murong Longshue's thunderous attacks. Willow, who was squatting on a branch in the distance, had an uncertain expression. He still had a handful of tangerine branches in his hand, and seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. He did not immediately help the woman who was in danger. Previously, Old Moth had taken advantage of the gap to stretch his arms and wander around the tangerine forest, and no one knew what he was writing. Old Spiderweb was obviously more careful than Willow, who was watching the fire from the other side of the river. He kicked down an orange tree and stabbed it towards Su Fengnian's back. Murong Longshue, who did not dare to hold back, used all of his strength to punch Old Spiderweb's chest. Coincidentally, the tangerine tree stabbed into his back. The punch and the tree pulled each other together, and according to common sense, even if Old Spiderweb's body was like a diamond, his heart would be smashed and he would die on the spot. After Old Moth kicked out, he turned his head and glared at Willow. Willow rolled his eyes and swept to the side of Su Fengnian and Murong Longshue. However, Su Fengnian was unexpectedly unscathed. He finally took a step back and was willing to let go of Murong Longshue's big head. His hands slid down and held her cheeks up. Murong Longshue, whose body was full of qi, was lifted off the ground. Su Fengnian slowly, walked to her side and swept a leg across the Beimang commandery princess's abdomen.
Her tall and sturdy body bent in a deformed arc in the air and then shot towards Willow, who had rushed over to rescue her. Willow ignored the commandery princess's precious body and fell rapidly. At the same time, Old Moth put his thumb and index finger together and drew an inexplicable straight line in front of him. No less than 100 tangerine trees were uprooted and thrown at the lone Su Fengnian, and then exploded in the air. Willow's mouth curled up and his 10 fingers played the strings. He was full of sword chi. The chaotic sword chi overflowed between heaven and earth like the Milky Way flowing in reverse, forming a cage with nowhere to hide. Su Fengnian stepped out and bent his knees slightly. It was as if he was carrying a cauldron on his shoulders. His hands lifted up into the air. With him as the center, the ground of hundreds of feet was lifted up. A rising curtain of mud faced the torrential sword chi that poured down in torrents. It was like an umbrella blocking the rain. Willow held a branch with both hands and coincidentally stabbed down at the center of the umbrella above Su Fengnian's head. Making use of the opportunity, Willow's shade. Su Fengnian looked up indifferently and stared straight at the famous killer of Beimang. Willow guessed that the situation was strange and immediately stopped his attack. He would rather give up the rare opportunity than risk his life. However, just as Willow withdrew his sword, he clearly saw a scheming smile appear at the corner of that guy's mouth. In an instant, Willow stabbed down again based on intuition. When the branch in his hand touched the space between Su Fengnian's eyebrows, Willow's heart calmed down. The branch had already pierced half a fingernail into the space between his eyebrows. Willow's eyes were sinister and wild with joy. The two of them were only a few feet apart, but the branch suddenly could not move forward at all. Willow did not lose his composure and wanted to withdraw his branch. However, a person in a red robe stepped on his back fiercely. Su Fengnian's fingers touched each other and pierced Willow's chest. Then he gently tore outwards. Willow's corpse was torn apart in the air. A large pool of blood splattered on Su Fengnian's face. Su Fengnian was still expressionless and did not say anything. He only shook his wrists and silently shook off the blood on his hands. He looked at the 2 remaining Beimang masters in the orange garden. Chapter 843. Seeing a section willow being torn apart, Old Moth was flabbergasted. The great leader of the spider web, Li Mibi, had personally given the order for the 3 of them to work together. There was a reason behind this. Junju Murong Longxue possessed the physique of Vajra and was an expert in close combat. Together with a section willow, who was proficient in assassination, they were almost flawless. With the help of Old Moth, who was one of the 2 cocoons, he was an experienced man. He could add some icing on the cake or do some shady business to fill in the gaps. Even if they were up against 2 masters of the Li Yang Finger Mystery Realm, they could still fight. Even if a section willow was hit by 2 swords and a saber, which severely damaged his combat power, Old Moth did not believe that he could break the stalemate within the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. A battle to the death between experts was not only a battle of strength but also a battle of wits. In fact, Old Moth could see some clues. At that time, a section willow partnered with him and created a torrential rain of sword chi that poured down from the sky. Su Fengnian lifted up the ground to act as an umbrella and purposely revealed a fatal flaw at the handle of the umbrella. A section willow also suspected that it was a trap and made a gesture of withdrawing his sword midway. However, for some unknown reason, a section willow, who was famous for being good at capturing murderous intents, changed his mind and decisively stabbed his sword between his eyebrows. In fact, he almost succeeded. If a section willow successfully retreated, not to mention the great merit of the spider web, it would not be difficult for the Empress to bestow a few princesses and princesses. Moreover, the tripartite balance of power between the Beimang, Li Yang, and Beiliang would be weakened. Old Moth never expected that he would still be fine, while the one willow that Li Mibi valued greatly could only die in a foreign land. It wasn't that Old Moth had never crossed a quagmire situation where his hands and feet were bound. A few years ago, he had even surrounded a finger-profound realm cultivator who wasn't willing to be recruited by Northern Mang with another cocoon. That was also a life-and-death battle. A newborn calf was not afraid of a tiger, but a middle-aged man would be afraid of death, let alone an old man like Old Moth who had licked blood from the edge of a blade for most of his life. He began to miss the canary he kept in the private courtyard of Northern Mang more and more. Old Moth always liked to pinch her body until there were strings of bruises on her body. If he had known that he would encounter the crown prince of the Beiliang, who relied on an otherworldly item to reach the false state of celestial phenomenon, he would have brought along the cocoon who was proficient in many kinds of finger mysterious arts.
Otherwise, he would have invited Sword Aura whose real name was Sun Xiaopu. Murong Longshui sat cross-legged on the ground. The severity of his injuries could not be seen. He smiled at Su Fengnian and said, I heard that you met Tuoba Chun's son on the grassland. You were besieged by him, the Thunder Spear Duanbua Erwi, and the colorful python brocade sleeve man. At that time, I reckon that you had just entered the Vajra realm. Unexpectedly, you killed one of them. I believe you, but I have always been curious about how you did it.
Now I somewhat understand that my trip to Liyang was not in vain.
Su Fengnian leisurely walked toward Old Moth and said to Murong Longshui, That time, I was chased around like a dog. Duanbua Erwi's thunder spear even pierced a hole in my body. It was a bit miserable. But to be honest, after killing the devil Xia Ling at the Duckhead Green Inn, I am not too afraid of the so-called first-grade masters. After all, I have fought with Luo Yang and the fifth raccoon. So, it doesn't matter whether I am a fox borrowing the tiger's might or not. I don't expect to kill all of you in one breath.
But if we have to talk about who will pay a bigger price, it will definitely be you who are unfamiliar with this place after a long time.
Murong Longshui stood up and said playfully, Regarding the matter of cultivation backfeeding, there seems to be a saying that the well water does not interfere with the river water. Regarding the death of the fifth raccoon, I once asked the Qilin spiritual master about it. The imperial preceptor said that the well water in your body has dried up and there is not a drop left. Naturally, the water from the princess tomb's otherworldly item will flow backward. If it were someone else, their meridians would have exploded. However, I don't know if I misunderstood or if His Royal Highness is scheming against us again. He deliberately used a trick to make it seem like your well is not dry anymore. If you continue to let the Zhu robe otherworldly item instill cultivation into your well, I am afraid that it will leave irreversible sequelae. If we take risks again and again, we will eventually lose the right path of the art of war. Today, a willow horse has lost its front hooves. Tomorrow, it might be His Royal Highness who has a great king of Bailiang in his pocket. Su Fengnian stopped and said with a smile, You can see that? Murong Longshui was slightly stunned and seemed to be a bit annoyed. He pointed at Su Fengnian's hair and said, Your Highness, aren't you asking the obvious? Your white hair is showing signs of turning black. Even a blind person can see it. Su Fengnian nodded and then shook his head. Using his familiar northern Mang accent, he said, You didn't guess wrongly. After I lost the Great Yellow Court, I finally started to recover my vitality. Logically speaking, I shouldn't create unnecessary trouble at this time. However, you, Murong Longshui, the northern Mang princess, the precious daughter of Murong Baoding, came to Liyang to assassinate me. Moreover, there was Sword Qi near Huangqing, a section of Willow, and this Cobweb Senior in front of me. I don't know why you guys didn't make a move in Great Peace City and Divine Martial City, but you probably don't want to return empty-handed. Most likely, you guys will continue to oppose me shamelessly.
Since I finally gained the upper hand today, even if I kill 1,000 enemies and lose 800 of my own men, I will still gain 200. After I return to northern Liang, it doesn't matter whether I am a second-grade martial artist or a first-grade martial artist. Murong Longshui's eyes were sincere as he smiled and said, To be honest, Spiderweb sent out 2 cocoons and several poles to the south this time. Their original intention was to assassinate your highness, but they were stopped in Great Peace City, so they didn't dare to act rashly. However, I didn't plan on getting involved in this mess from the start. I went south to investigate the demon Luo Yang's whereabouts and confirm whether Broken Spear Deng Mao and Yelu Dongchuang followed Luo Yang out of Beimang. After Han Diaoxi was killed by your highness outside of Shenwu City, Spiderweb completely gave up on the idea of fanning the flames. Instead, they turned to investigate the plans of the greatest threat to Beimang, Luo Yang. However, Su Longxiang and the little girl behind your highness made things difficult for us. We are also very troubled. After these 2 fights, Beimang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Right now, Luo Yang should have sensed that Spiderweb was going to deal with this. If Spiderweb retreated back to Beimang unscathed, Grandpa Li would be so worried that he would break many of his roots. As long as your highness is willing to watch from the side and watch the tigers fight, Murong Longshui will owe your highness a favor. How about it? Su Fengnian said in surprise, Isn't Yelu Dongchuang a relative of Beimang's imperial family? How did he get involved with Luo Yang? Broken Spear Deng Mao is an expert ranked even higher than Human Cat on the martial rankings. Why would he be a pawn for Luo Yang?
Why don't you have the arrogance of a top expert? Murong Longshui smiled bitterly. What your highness is asking is exactly what I wanted to know when I secretly infiltrated Liyang. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and joked. Murong Longshui, our statuses are roughly the same. Look, when I went to Beimang, I killed 2 of the top 10 demons of the demonic path, as well as the mountain lord of Soldier Mountain. Aren't you envious? The tall and sturdy Murong Longshui smiled sweetly. You're a man, and I'm a woman. What's there to fight for? Sooner or later, I'll marry and become a wife. If you want to fight for your dignity, that's the duty of that stuffy Yelu Dongchuang. Su Fengnian smiled. Straightforward, I like it. Then you can leave. Don't forget, you owe me a favor. Murong Longshui smiled and asked, Really? Chapter 844. Su Fengnian waved his hand. Old Moth, who had been left aside for a long time, finally felt relieved. He really didn't want to fight with a reckless fake heavenly phenomenon. In Beimang, no one would give face to the king of Beiliang, Su Xiao. Old Moth was reluctant to admit that this white-haired young man was able to walk out alive and even bring 2 heads home. He was even more impressed that there were talents in Jianghu. Even if Beimang had Hong Jingyan, who had already achieved great things, Tuoba Chun's son, who gradually became more courageous in the face of setbacks, and Princess Murong and Little Prince Yelu, he only knew the depth of Liang Jianghu's heritage when he arrived at Liang Jianghu. Chess and Sword Music School's real name was Sun Xiaopu. When Tai Ping Ling joked that Beimang's swordplay was like rice in a barren field, Sun Xiaopu changed his name to Huang Qing. However, when he arrived at Liang, swordplay talents were like worthless weeds that were cut down again and again. The people of Liang didn't care at all, but their neighbors Beimang trembled with fear. When one's fate was flourishing, the land and water were good. When the land and water were good, talents would emerge. This was the common sense that all the dynasties followed. The empress couldn't hold back anymore. She didn't want to let the Zhao family of Liang slowly grow so that she could digest the power of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. The military god Tuoba was tricked by Luo Yang in the Arctic tundra. Even Tai Ping Ling, who was already the empress's teacher, was caught off guard. The empress was furious, but within a year, tens of thousands of elite cavalry were still led by the nose by white-robed Luo Yang and suffered heavy losses. In the end, she even fled to Liang. If Luo Yang turned to the Zhao family of Liang, it would definitely make Beimang's morale drop to rock bottom after the Beiliang cavalry surprise attack on the border. Murong Longshui turned around and left casually. Old Moth was more cautious and slowly retreated. Su Fengnian stared at Old Moth and laughed softly. I said that princess can leave, but I didn't say that you can leave. Last time, a large group of Beimang assassins from the Jianghu wanted to infiltrate the border and assassinate Beiliang officials. If I remember correctly, it was Yorli Mibi who planned this. The 6 big and small leaders of the spider web personally took the lead. This debt needs to be settled clearly. Murong Longshui angrily turned around. Your Highness, isn't there no meaning in saying that? Su Fengnian said with a smile, Commandery Princess is sincere, but that old man Spiderweb is not very honest. He probably sent a secret message to Spiderweb. It is clear that he has not given up on his evil intentions. He wants to take advantage of the fact that I am alone to do something that he could not do in Great P City and Shenwu City. Su Fengnian flicked his sleeves, and 8 flying swords floated in front of him. Since you sent a wasp to send a message, then don't blame me for using my best sword tomb flying swords to kill butterflies and spiders. Murong Longshui and Old Moth looked at each other and retreated at the same time. At the same time, Su Fengnian did not hesitate to follow them. He kept a close distance and did not let the 2 escape. The little girl carrying the withered sunflower followed behind Su Fengnian without saying a word. In the distance, Murong Longshui imperceptibly slowed down his footsteps and secretly checked his qi. Su Fengnian suddenly sped up and the distance between them shortened from 400 feet to 300 feet. Murong Longshui, who originally wanted to use this to test whether Su Fengnian was strong on the outside but weak on the inside, sighed and began to retreat for real. She did not believe that Su Fengnian would let her go for a favor. There were only 2 possibilities why Su Fengnian did not immediately give chase after killing a section of the willow tree. The first possibility was that he did not have enough strength and was using all his strength to fight 1 against 3. His situation was not good. If that was the case, Murong Longshui did not mind severely injuring Su Fengnian in exchange for his life.
The second possibility was that this treacherous prince, who was familiar with fighting to the death, was using his old trick again. He deliberately showed weakness again so that he could easily kill her and Old Moth, who were not weak. Old Moth could involve the hidden forces of Spiderweb, and Su Fengnian might be able to call for reinforcements. When the time came, the outcome would still be 50-50. Su Fengnian flew through the air to chase after the two. The young assassin he nicknamed Miss Hee followed behind him all the time. Su Fengnian wiped his face with his hand. His palm was full of blood. He hesitated for a moment and honestly said in a low voice, "That princess is very cunning. I have to puff myself up at my own cost. If it were not for her undying desire to kill me, I would have taken you and run away. I fought with Zhao Ningxin on the Spring God Lake, so I can't continue to let her instill her cultivation without any scruples. This is a good thing for me. The qi in my body is growing rapidly, but it is not beneficial to the current situation. It will only be a burden. In a day or two, no matter how fast my internal energy grows, it will not be able to reach the first level." Moreover, she was heavily injured in the battle with the human cat in Jianghu City. This time, killing a section of Willow was more or less a bluff. If it were not for that section of Willow foolishly running into us, we would have been exposed. But don't worry, they can't kill you. If they want to kill me, even if I stand still and let them kill me, it will still not be easy. It can be said that we are in an invincible position. The only difference is how much we earn from this transaction." The young girl snorted. Su Fengnian looked into the distance. "It would be best if we can capture that princess and the old man alive. Then I will make a big profit. Later, we will sit down and split the loot. With our friendship, I promise I won't cheat you." The young lady kicked Su Fengnian's buttocks. The nimble and agile prince nimbly flipped through the air, continuing to steadily rush forward. She said with a light laugh, "Even if there are reinforcements hidden in the shadows, they wouldn't dare to rush over in such a reckless manner. Moreover, it's not like I don't have a backup plan. Let's just slowly play a game of cat and mouse with these two Northern Mang great figures. I can also use this chance to nurture my strength through battle, recover my cultivation, solidify the realm I lost and then regained. You are good at finding the right time and place to attack, while Suing is good at capturing auras. Let's give them a good time." After an entire day of cat and mouse hunting, Murong Longshui and Old Moth were extremely sullen. Su Fengnian had always maintained a distance of half a li from them. When they rested, Su Fengnian would slowly stop and harass and provoke them from a certain distance. When they moved forward, Su Fengnian would continue to tail them. There were even 2 times when he took the initiative to intercept them. When the first attack failed, he would make a prompt decision to retreat. It wasn't that Murong Longshui didn't think of taking the initiative, but Su Fengnian didn't give her the chance at all. He was adept at chasing and killing, and when he escaped, he was even faster than anyone else. If there was a section of Willow present, and both sides had a certain chance of winning, Murong Longshui and Old Moth wouldn't have been so passive. However, there weren't so many ifs in the world. In the night, Murong Longshui was washing his face by a stream in the depths of the wild forest. Su Fengnian was squatting on a large rock more than 100 feet away. He even had the leisure to worm his way into being friends with the princess of Beimang, persuading her not to be a princess, but to find a scholarly man in Beiliang and marry him. This made her so angry that her teeth itched. At that time, Old Moth had wanted to take a detour and launch a sneak attack, but he was blocked by a red robe. 3 days later, the two sides entered a town one after another. Murong Longshui was still fine. With the support of his diamond body, his complexion was still good. However, Old Moth, who was on tenterhooks, couldn't help but look dispirited. Su Fengnian casually stole 2 mink hats of different sizes from the market. He put one on himself and pressed the other on the little girl's head. The furry mink hat covered her eyebrows and forehead. If the sunflower on her shoulder wasn't mentioned, she looked somewhat like an ordinary girl. Chapter 845. Murong Longshui had not had a drop of water for 3 days and 2 nights. Since he could not get rid of the pair of maggots behind him, he might as well choose a restaurant in the busy city. He took out an ingot of gold from the small pouch on his waist and tossed it to the waiter, telling him to keep the change. He ordered a table of sumptuous food and wine and sat down by the window. Whether it was his extravagant spending or her rare mountain-like figure, they were all very eye-catching. Murong Longshui did not see that bastard outside the window, so he was happy that he did not see and did not feel annoyed.
He only cared about eating large pieces of meat. On the other hand, the spider moth chewed and swallowed slowly. A few diners nearby were whispering and commenting on Murong Long Shui. They were not very polite and reserved in their words. The spider moth had accumulated quite a bit of anger in the past 3 days and wanted to quietly teach this group of rude people a lesson. Murong Long Shui gently shook his head and drank a large mouthful of soju wine that he had never tasted before. He held it in his mouth and was not in a hurry to swallow it, slowly savoring the taste. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw an endless stream of people in the busy city. The small families were also wearing silk and satin. Murong Long Shui was somewhat entranced. After the spring and autumn turmoil ended in Liang, the brocade and colored silk obtained from the western Shu, the southern Tang, the eastern Yu, and the other 3 places amounted to millions of bolts. These years, the Zhao family of Liang was much more lax in customizing the clothes of the common people compared to the previous dynasties. Murong Long Shui swallowed the wine, pursed his lips and softly murmured, "What a picture of peace and prosperity." Behind a green wall less than 5 feet away, there were only a few pedestrians. Su Fengnian, wearing a mink hat, was squatting at the corner of the wall, chewing a scallion pancake as he muttered vaguely. Without delay, he raised his sleeve, like a small squad leader pretending to be a soldier on the battlefield, giving orders to a few flying swords floating in front of him. With a flick of his finger, 3 of the swords flew along the wall and out of the alley. In an instant, they pierced through the window and pierced straight at Murong Long Shui through the window. Old Moth's finger lightly tapped on the table, and wisps of white mist appeared between the flying swords and the princess. The 3 naughty flying swords were unable to succeed, so they turned back the way they came. As soon as the first wave left, the second wave came. This time, the 3 swords came at a tricky angle, and after piercing through the window, they quickly scattered. Old Moth immediately knocked on the table in a hurry. The 3 swords came and left in a hurry, but the third wave came in the blink of an eye, never tiring. This made Old Moth, who was focused on concealment, more and more tired of dealing with them. A few sharp-eyed drinkers saw the white mist by the window, and vaguely bright fireflies. Murong Long Shui put down his wine bowl heavily. He had just advised Old Moth not to make a big fuss when she suddenly stood up, smashed through the window, and ran away in big strides. Everybody in the restaurant was dumbstruck. Could it be that this woman was a Jianghu heroine who had hidden her strength? Su Fengnian, who was standing at the foot of the green wall, quickly put a small half of the scallion pancake in his mouth and ran away. Murong Long Shui stood in the middle of the alley, his 5 fingers hooked into the wall, crushing the bricks in his palms. His face turned ashen. Old Moth was also annoyed by Su Fengnian's endless tricks, but he did not know how to comfort that young Junju. The reason why they didn't give chase was because this kid's flying sword technique was too accurate. Within 10 zhong, the flying swords hovered just right in front of them, quietly waiting for their prey. 8 flying swords, that was the starting point of 8 traps. Old Moth could not help muttering, "It's really chasing a dog that randomly shits. Wherever you go, you have to worry about your shoes being stained with dog poop. If you don't chase, he'll just bark a few times behind your butt. He's really hard to deal with." Murong Long Shui was amused by this vulgar metaphor, and the haze in his heart dissipated. At the end of the alley, that guy seemed to have noticed that the 2 did not have the intention to pursue and fight. He appeared with a mischievous smile and leaned against the wall. After finishing the scallion pancake, he casually wiped his greasy fingers on his mink hat and kindly reminded them, "You 2 immortal couples still haven't made up your mind? When I call over thousands of Bailiang cavalry, each of them spit a mouthful of saliva to drown you. Be careful not to become a pair of dying mandarin ducks, swimming in their saliva." Murong Long Shui stared fixedly at that bastard who was paddling and sneered, "Don't talk nonsense. Right now, Spiderweb and the Bailiang spies have become a thorn in Zhao Gou's side. No one dares to act rashly. If you can mobilize 1,000 cavalry from Bailiang here, I, Murong Long Shui, will not only obediently allow myself to be captured, but I'll also be willing to be Su Fengnian's servant." Su Fengnian laughed loudly. "You said it yourself. If you have the ability, then just wait. Tide Listening Pavilion has a Taoist scripture that records the ability to cast beans into soldiers. Do you dare to give me 3 days? When I master this ability, you'll be my servant." What a coincidence. Wutongin is lacking a sword servant. I see that you're tall and strong, but you have a strong aura. How about it? Murong Longshui gritted his teeth and squeezed out a smile. That's negotiable. Not to mention a sword. I'll even carry a spirit tablet for you in the future. Su Fengnian pretended to be angry and said, Are you cursing me? Hey, silkworm-rearing old man, why don't you discipline your wife? How are you managing the household? Have you lived for so many years in vain? You said that I'm a dog sh*t, but when you're having sex with the princess, do you think it's romantic? I heard that you have a bad reputation